morning. Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to take a moment to appreciate the incredible men and women at Portland Fire and Rescue. At 1:08 a.m. this morning, a call came in from a care facility at 120th and Southeast Padre Street in Portland. A caller at the facility told dispatchers that there was a fire in the roof of this facility. Crews were dispatched at 1:09 a.m., and the first apparatus on scene found heavy fire from the roof line and went in for a search. While Engine 7 began to pull hose lines to fight the fire, Truck 7 went interior. While Engine 7 began to pull hose, Truck 7 went interior where they found a couple of employees of the facility pulling residents out to safety. Truck 7 began to pull other victims from their rooms as the fire blew down the vents and light fixtures above their heads. Truck 7 requested more crews to help with evacuation, so Engine 29 and Engine 25 assisted in evacuation as every room had people inside that couldn't evacuate themselves. A total of 16 people were evacuated out of the front of the structure. At approximately 1:15, command called for a second alarm. At this point, a mass casualty incident was called for due to the possibility of multiple victims. This brought additional fire units as well as AMR transport units. Truck 7 continued the search of the rear of the building where they found an attached two-story building that had additional residents. They were able to safely evacuate an additional 8 victims and get them to safety. At this point, the priorities of command shifted to extinguishment, and the additional crews focused more on the fire now that was consuming a large portion of the attic space of this U-shaped building. Crews did begin to pull the ceiling and attack the fire from below, but the attic was so heavily involved that crews were ordered to withdraw and attack the fire from the exterior until it was safe to continue interior work. During the firefighting operations, crews included fire, AMR, Portland Police Bureau, helped move victims to a safe place to allow operations to continue. At about 1:44, part of the roof structure collapsed, but did not fall onto any firefighters as they were ordered out in anticipation of such collapse. Firefighters were able to get the fire under control, and it was recalled at 2:25 a.m. It is without a doubt that having the appropriate resources made a difference in the outcome of this incident. When asked about this, Fire Chief Sarah Boone said, "First and foremost, I want to commend the heroism of the 2 on-site employees who risked their lives starting the initial evacuation of the residents under heavy fire conditions. When firefighters arrived, their number one priority was the immediate rescue of every resident within the facility under worsening fire conditions. Because of their tactical decisions and valiant efforts, so many lives were saved and turned near tragedy into an incredible success story." I'd like to recognize and thank AMR, our mutual aid partners, Clackamas County Fire and Gresham Fire, BOAC, Portland Police, TriMet, Red Cross, PGE, and Northwest Natural Gas for their critical contributions on this complex incident. Today, Portland should be proud that not one life was lost last evening because of this fire. And Mayor, if we could just have a moment of silence. Thank you, Mayor and colleagues.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. All right, good morning, everybody. This is the May 11th, 2022 morning session of the Portland City Council. We're now in session. Keelan, please call the roll.
Ryan.
Here.
Hardesty.
Here.
Mapp.
Here.
Rubio.
Here.
Wheeler.
Here. We will now turn this over to legal counsel for the rules of order and decorum. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mayor. Welcome to the Portland City Council. The City of Portland is transitioning its facilities from closed to limited public access. City Council is holding hybrid public meetings with limited in-person attendance in addition to electronic attendance. Members of council will elect to attend remotely by teleconference or in person from week to week. The meeting is available for the public to listen on the city's YouTube channel, eGov, PDX, and Channel 30. If you wish to testify before council in person or virtually, you must sign up in advance by visiting the council agenda on the council clerk's webpage at www.portland.gov/council/agenda. You may sign up for communications to briefly speak about any subject. You may also sign up for public testimony on resolutions, reports, or the first readings of ordinances. In-person testimony may occur from one of the following several locations, including City Council chambers and the Lovejoy Room at City Hall and the Portland Building. Written testimony may be submitted at cctestimony@portlandoregon.gov. Your testimony should address the matter being considered at the time. When testifying, please state your name for the record. Your address is not necessary. Please disclose if you are a lobbyist. If you are representing an organization, please identify it. The presiding officer preserves order and decorum during City Council meetings so everyone can feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe. The presiding officer determines the length of testimony. Individuals generally have 3 minutes to testify unless otherwise stated. A timer will indicate when your time is done. If you are in the audience and would like to show your support or lack of support for something that is said, please feel free to do thumbs up or thumbs down. Please remain seated in council chambers unless exiting or entering. If you are filming the proceedings, please do not use bright lights or disrupt the meeting. Disruptive conduct such as shouting, refusing to conclude your testimony when your time is up, or interrupting others' testimony or council deliberations will not be allowed. If there are disruptions, a warning will be given that further disruption may result in the person being ejected for the remainder of the meeting. After being ejected, a person who fails to leave the meeting is subject to arrest for trespass. Should a disruption occur in person, council may take a short recess and can reconvene virtually. Thank you.
Mayor, the 5 communications are all together. Would you like me to read them all together? Okay. 367, request of Anya Phillips to address council regarding earthquake preparedness. 368, request of Coco Zemsky to address council regarding earthquake preparedness. 369, request of Stefan Krismanovich to address council regarding natural disaster preparedness. 370, request of Tarika Waters to address council regarding community gardens. And 371, request of Lainey Gluckman to address council regarding community gardens. Minda, are you there? It looks like you're muted.
Hi, Mayor and Commissioners. My students have timed their testimony and we're asking that they share the 15 minutes between 3 groups. Is that okay?
That's fine. And if we could turn down the volume a little in the chamber, that'd be great too. Thanks. It's like my daughter learning to drive.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Anya, and I have come here today with my group members, Coco, Maya, and Naomi, to discuss earthquake preparedness in Portland Public Schools. We are a group of 8th graders at Gilkey International Middle School. who are proposing a policy regarding the issue of a lack of information about earthquake preparedness for students and families in schools within the Portland-Beaverton area.
So what is the problem? It is well known that the Cascadia earthquake is an imminent issue within the Pacific Northwest, with Portland being relatively close to the epicenter. When the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake strikes, Portland's schools and families will be very unprepared, at least with the current measures that are being taken. As students, we don't feel as though we have been educated enough on the matter, and we also feel as if the current policy is lacking the information that is needed to keep people safe. The current policy only requires schools to have 2 earthquake drills every year, and it only educates the students to drop, cover, and hold in the event of an earthquake. This requirement is the bare minimum, and it only covers what to do in a very specific situation when you are in a classroom. What if you are in the gym, or in the bathroom, or at practice, or hiking? What if there isn't a table nearby? And what if you do survive the earthquake, but you don't know about the aftershocks, gas leaks, fires, and other dangers? Many families and students are also now very aware of the issues and do not have an emergency plan. This is the problem.
To counteract this lack of earthquake preparedness in Portland, we have come to a consensus that the most effective way to begin spreading awareness is by schools providing families and students with information and knowledge. This issue of lack of education is clearly a serious problem, as it can cause lives to be at risk, especially in Portland.
Specifically, we want to focus on helping school children and their families be more prepared in the case of this event by implementing a higher emphasis on earthquake safety and emergency preparedness in schools. We have been in contact with coordinators at the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management, and they also agree that there is a lack of earthquake preparedness education in the curriculum. As previously mentioned, the current policy only requires 2 annual earthquake drills, as well as minimal earthquake preparedness education that only teaches students what to do if they are in the classroom. However, it is very likely that there will be outside of the classroom when the earthquake occurs, which is why it is important to teach students what to do in different scenarios, as well as how they can deal with the aftermath of the earthquake. Teaching families and children these things, especially at a young age, will provide them with possibly life-saving information and will prepare them for the worst-case scenario if need be.
Our interview contact is Laura Hall, who is a disaster messaging expert with the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management and the Regional Disaster Preparedness Organization. According to her, one of the best ways to make our community more prepared for disasters like earthquakes is to have more preparedness about them in schools. This can be in the form of an email, brochure, newsletter, announcement, lesson, or in the best case, a required curriculum. Sending or teaching this information will give families information that they need to create an emergency plan and will therefore create more safety within the families and the community as a whole. In addition, we have looked through many of the policies that have been put into place, and based on our research, we have concluded that the policies regarding earthquake safety education are very minimal, as stated before. So we are asking you, the Portland City Council, to require Portland Public Schools to provide families with information regarding what to do in the event of an emergency such as an earthquake. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Does that complete your presentation?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Oh, great. I have a couple of comments. First of all, thank you for being here today, and thank you for highlighting an issue that has not gotten enough attention during the pandemic. Obviously, we've been focused on other issues, but as you are correctly reminding us, we are still in an earthquake zone. I have a daughter that appears to be your age or maybe slightly older. She is 15 years old. And the reality wake up for her was watching YouTube videos of the Fukushima earthquake, including surveillance videos that were shot inside local schools as well as businesses. And if you want to see how terrifying an actual earthquake can be, watch some of those videos. They are very unsettling. You can imagine that if you are taken by surprise in a major earthquake, you will be panic-stricken. and the people around you will be panic-stricken. But it's also interesting to note in a number of the videos that people seem to know exactly what to do. They seemed calm. They were encouraging and reassuring other people in the room. And that, to me, is the difference between preparation and non-preparation. And I always acknowledge that each of us, not just in our school facilities, but also in our individual homes, we have to have a plan. And that includes a plan on where to gather. That means having a supply of food and water that is available. It means having the proper wrench and knowing where to turn off the gas and having that wrench located near the gas shutoff, and understanding who in your neighborhood might need a little extra help and to be checked in on, amongst other things. I do strongly support the recommendations that you've made to make sure that our young students understand what they should expect in the event of an earthquake and have both practicing and planning in place for resilience. And I hope that as the pandemic dissipates in the coming months, that we will again focus our attention on the resilience question that you've raised today. So I just really want to applaud you and thank you for bringing this forward, because it is always timely and it is always important and it is ultimately about saving lives. So thank you. Commissioner Hardesty.
I also just want to add my thanks to you being here today and talking about an issue that's really, really important. I want you to know that the Regional Disaster Policy Development Committee, in fact, has just recently put out a series of community grants to do just what you've recommended, to make sure that we are talking to schools and other community-based organizations so that they are ready and when the disasters occur. And what we saw last summer is clearly that disasters can happen at any time, and we need to be really prepared with all the information possible. So I just want to thank you as a class for coming and being so well prepared to discuss an issue that's really, really significant. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you for your testimony this morning. Keelan, was there one other person who wanted to testify this morning?
Minda, are there other students?
There are 2 other student groups.
Oh, there's 2 others.
Yeah.
Oh, very, very good. Yeah, so just let me know when you're done. I'm sorry, I wouldn't have jumped in right there if I'd known that. Sorry, go ahead.
Are you ready for the second group?
Yeah, yes, we are. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Stefan Krishnanovich. I'm going to be talking about earthquake preparedness as well. Off the coast of Oregon, the North American plate, the Pacific tectonic plate, and the Juan de Fuca tectonic plate collide, pushing the Juan de Fuca tectonic plate under the North American plate. And the last time these plates slipped, releasing the energy stored in these plates, was 322 years ago in January of 1700. According to Portland State University, the earthquake that is set to happen will be between 9.0 and 9.5 on the Richter scale, topping the 2011 Japan earthquake that caused the Fukushima nuclear power plant meltdown. In the current state of our earthquake preparedness, 250,000 people will face long-term displacement, and up to $80 billion in building damage and the city will face up to $80 billion of building damage, according to the Oregonian newspaper. The city's oil and natural gas reserves built near the St. John's Bridge on Phil will also face destruction, and they will sink into the Willamette River, devastating the aquatic ecosystem as far as into the Columbia. To prepare for the earthquake, Portland should look to countries like Japan and states like California for what to do. Japan has retrofitted roads, bridges, airports, and buildings with new materials and building techniques that help them withstand earthquakes. California also has signs in public buildings with earthquake emergency routes so people know how to get out. Portland can also inform people with billboards, advertising campaigns, and school curriculums for what to do when the earthquake hits. This can help up to 5,000 people avoid serious injury or even death, according to Pamphlet Media. And according to science teacher Beth Clifton, who teaches earthquake preparedness to FAIS families every year, a lot of families do not have the necessary supplies to last long enough in the aftermath of the earthquake for rescuers to come get them. This would kill or even injure many more than the initial earthquake itself. And if Portland does not take action, that will happen. In order to prepare for the potentially record-breaking earthquake due to hit Portland, Portland needs to prepare its citizens and its buildings to lessen the aftermath and lessen the effect on the people. That's all.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
The last group is not about earthquake preparedness. I don't know if you had any questions or follow-up for Stefan, or if you want to move to the last group.
Let's go ahead and hear the last group, and then we'll open it up to the council.
To preface our presentation, may we have permission to share our visuals in order to further support our presentation?
Keelan, can you help them with that?
Yes, do you want to share your screen?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Okay, so today we're going to be talking about food deserts. Food deserts are area in which people don't have access to have affordable, healthy food within at least half a mile of them. Many low-income families are located in food deserts, which is problematic when in need of their necessities. They would need to travel way further in order to get foods and basic necessities. Food stores located in these food deserts are most likely gas stations with unhealthy food. Food deserts can lead to a large increase in the likelihood of health problems being developed. When people eat junk food on a daily basis, it can lead to an increased risk of obesity and chronic diseases like cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and some cancers. Of course, these are just a couple of examples, and there's a lot more diseases or bad things that can happen from eating junk food on a daily basis. Even though transportation has become a necessity, it doesn't always solve the problem of people being affected by food deserts. So far, there hasn't been that much or any action to solve this problem. So we have made a list of possible solutions that could be helpful when dealing with this issue. We thought it should be handled by policies, as there are no policies currently helping it at the moment, and not much has really been done to help this.
I would now like to identify our two alternative policies alongside our main course of action that we'll be stating more about later on. Alternative policy number 1, building accessible bus stops in food deserts. We would be directing this policy to the northeasternmost area since Portland's food deserts are mainly found there. Here's an idea of how this should work. A bus stop will be located in the center of the neighborhood, which would be an accessible spot for everyone. The bus will have scheduled routes to stop by this bus stop and take those that live in this food desert to grocery stores that would be hard to reach on foot. These farther grocery stores wouldn't be gas stations. Instead, they would have healthy variety of food. Alternative policy number 2, issuing a tax credit or incentive to grocery stores to build additional stores within food deserts. If a grocery store is being given a tax credit to move into these locations, then they will have financial incentive to build stores within food deserts. This policy works well because it's a win for both the neighborhood and the company. Having a grocery store nearby where you can easily access fresh fruits and vegetables while having less taxes to pay. Our third policy is our main course of action, which would be to grow a garden in a governmental shared space, which we'll be explaining further right now.
The policy we chose would be to grow a garden in a government shared space in food deserts. As you can see on the screen, we have the parks and food deserts, and you can see that they're very close to each other. These neighborhoods are Argay, Wilkes, Powhurst, Gilbert, Pleasant Valley, and Centennial.
The other reason we decided to do this is because the director of Portland Parks and Recreation, and Adina Long, has been trying to develop facilities for public recreation and community building, and we thought that gardens would be a great facility to add. We decided to interview someone named Anthea who works at a nonprofit organization that specializes in gardens called Growing Gardens. In her words, there has been a lot of research around the mental and physical health benefits of gardening, which we love and support. But growing your own food is also about food security. Buying healthy foods at stores isn't always a financial option to many families. Offering another avenue to feed the body and mind, grow connection, as well as independence is a huge benefit as well. We also think that this problem would make food more accessible to people living in food deserts. Another reason why we chose it over the other policies is because we thought it would be the most fun and practical to implement. Because tax credits, we didn't know which business to give it to, and the bus stops would be much more difficult to add to the schedules of the buses, and it would make a lot more work for the bus drivers. Some of the disadvantages of this public policy is that it may be expensive to grow plants in a greenhouse. Greenhouses usually cost between $205 and $25,000. However, this cost is optional. As for the actual garden, it would usually cost around $200 to make one garden. However, a lot of that cost can be cut down depending on the amount of plants you buy.
However, we decided to leave this up to you guys to handle, as we thought that it would give you some flexibility on how you would like to implement this policy if you decide to. Some options you have is to hire a company that works on gardens to take care of it, allow nonprofit organizations to take care of the gardens, allow locals to take care of the gardens and check in on them once in a while. I'm sure there are many more options, but those are some suggestions. There are indeed some advantages to this, which is what you can see in Detroit's food deserts. Detroit is one of America's biggest food deserts. Data shows how 30,000 people in Detroit don't have access to a full-time grocer, and 48% of households don't have access to enough food. However, over the last 10 years, Detroit has gone a lot better. A big part of this was community gardens. So if it worked well there, why not try in Portland?
I hope you take our main policy idea or the other ones we thought of into consideration, knowing how important the problem of food deserts is. And that concludes our presentation. Do you have any comments or questions?
Thank you. The answer is yes. I see several people. Commissioner Maps, why don't you start? Commissioner Hardesty next.
Here we go. Mostly, I just want to thank the students today for their presentation. I was particularly moved by your thoughts on food deserts. I've worked on those issues in the past, trying to get a grocery outlet in the Parkrose neighborhood, and I can tell you, actually, getting a grocery store into a neighborhood that has not had a grocery store is truly transformative, and then integrating it with public transportation also is literally an important act in community building. I look forward to working with my colleagues on council and in the private sector to make this vision a reality. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner Maps. Commissioner Hardesty.
I just want to applaud the incredible research that you have done and the incredible presentation that you've presented to us today. I will tell you, I live in a food desert, and I can tell you it wasn't always a food desert. But major corporations decided they weren't making enough money in low-income communities, so they pulled up stakes and went somewhere where they could make more money. So that is the reality of national food chains and how they tend to operate. I saw an incredible model, honestly, at New Columbia, where there is a community grocery store, and it is ran by the residents that live at New Columbia. And it is ran on a point system where if folks who are running out of money at the end of the month can still be able to shop there with coupons that they are given because they are all in the same neighborhood. I think there's some incredible models. That one is one of them that I really hold up as a model. And I hope when you guys get out of school that we're not actually dependent on international corporations to provide our basic food needs. I hope we've actually created a real desire to return back to farming. I think what we've learned during COVID is that we have to be able to make our own food, and we have to be able to have access to fresh fruit and vegetables. So I just say I love your creativity and your thinking, but let's not think about like paying people who are making a fortune to bring food into our communities. How about we actually do our own so we actually don't need them?
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. Commissioner Rubio.
Thank you. I just want to commend the students for your great ideas and your very clear and articulate policy recommendations to us. Food deserts are critically important for us to pay attention to. And in my prior work in a nonprofit, we saw that quite often, that there were many communities that didn't have access to the resources they need to have healthy, nutritious meals. And so today you're giving voice to thousands of Portlanders right now. And I just want to lift that up and say that I'm just really proud of your engagement, and that the fact that you're so young and you're recognizing the need to speak up on this behalf gives me hope for the future. And I join my colleagues. I look forward in working with you on tracking this issue, and I commit to doing my part to ensuring that we address this issue in our role. Thanks for being here.
And I commented earlier on the earthquake preparedness. I'll just speak generally to the work that you're doing in class, and I applaud your teacher and your school for giving you both this focus as well as this space to be able to present to the Portland City Council. Commissioner Ryan.
Yeah, thank you, students. It was all presentations were great this morning. And I have a question. The map you had, that was from Detroit, right? Detroit, Michigan?
Yep, it was.
Yeah, it's a great map. I liked it. Did you find anything like that? Do we have a map like that? I don't know if we do. Did you find one for Portland?
I couldn't actually find one for Portland.
Well, that says something. Okay. All right. Well, good. I just think you gave us a great suggestion. We should have a map like that. Yeah. All right. Good work. Thanks. Thanks for staffing us.
Thank you, Commissioner Ryan. I just want to applaud the approach that you took to doing your research. It's fact-based, very well done research. It also looks at best practices in other cities, as Commissioner Ryan just mentioned, Detroit. You are obviously collaborating, you're working together, and as you well know, all of the problems that we're facing as a community require a collaborative approach. There's no ability to solve problems in the community individually. We have to work together, and that means working with people who may have very different perspectives. Last but not least, you brought forward concrete, actionable ideas. And anytime that we're paying people for research, I always want to know specifically what are they asking us to do with that body of knowledge, and you came forward with some very specific outcomes. I spoke to the importance of resiliency with regard to the food deserts. I appreciate the fact that you looked at it from a multitude of different perspectives. You looked at it not only from the food security angle, which is critical, and we've certainly learned that lesson, and it dovetails nicely with your comments around resiliency, but also the health aspects of nutrition, as well as the activity that creating community gardens provides, as well as the independence that it allows for people who need that kind of a structure in their life. So I just think this was great research, and if I were grading you on this today, I'd give you all A+. So not to tell your teacher what to do, but I'm just saying, I think you did a great amount of research, and there's a number of people here in the council chambers who've testified before the city council, and they understand it can be very high pressure and stressful, and you've done extremely well, and I want to thank you all for that. So thanks, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you. Keelan, did we have one other person, or does that complete?
That completes communications.
Very good. We'll move into the consent agenda. Have any items been pulled off of the consent agenda?
One item has been pulled, 374.
374. Please call the roll on the remainder of the consent agenda.
Ryan?
Aye.
Hardesty?
Aye.
Maps?
Aye.
Rubio?
Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye. Consent agenda is approved. First time certain item, please, is item number 372, please.
Amend permit fee schedules for building, electrical, land use services, mechanical, enforcement, plumbing, signs, site development, and land use services fee schedule for the hearings office.
This is a non-emergency ordinance. Commissioner Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor. Colleagues, today we have before us the proposed fee changes for the Bureau of Development Services. BDS is responsible for administering and enforcing the state building code, as well as administering and enforcing the city's zoning code, Title 33, and regulations on floating structures, Title 28, erosion control, Title 10, signs, Title 32, murals, Title 4, property maintenance, Title 29, and portions of the tree code, Title 11. All those titles. Anyway, 98% of BDS ongoing funding comes from permit fees and charges for service. Fees need to be set at a rate to cover the cost of providing these services. COVID-19 pandemic triggered an economic downturn that has impacted the construction industry, particularly large commercial projects such as hotels, retail, office buildings. BDS revenues are down when compared to pre-pandemic levels. BDS reserves levels have declined in the past year while costs continue to rise in the inflationary economic environment, such as supply chain material cost. The Bureau experiences rising cost of providing services due to increase in personnel cost and the need to competitively retain highly skilled labor in an environment of increased labor cost of living. Please remember the lockbox nature of BDS finances. Fees from BDS programs administering the state building code are regulated by state law, and revenue from one program cannot be used to fund other local programs such as administration of the zoning code, sign code, or tree code. The ability for BDS to provide timely, predictable services is essential in keeping the construction industry working, adding to the housing supply, supporting business development, and attracting investment in Portland. The fee changes proposed today are necessary to maintain fiscal stability, implement important process and technology improvement work to shorten permitting timelines and keep up with cost inflation. These fee changes will help the Bureau maintain and expand staffing levels, positioning the Bureau for increases in demand for services as our economy recovers. With us today is BDS Deputy Director Elshad Haji, but BDS Budget Finance Manager Kyle O'Brien to provide additional background and information about the proposal. I think I'm handing it over to you, Elshad. Correct? You
Thank
there,
you, Commissioner
Elshad?
Ryan.
All right.
Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners. Elshad Hajiev, he, him pronouns, Deputy Director for the Bureau of Development Services. To add to what Commissioner Ryan described about the Bureau and our fees, we are responsible for traditional building department functions of architectural and engineering plan review, permit issuance, inspections, enforcement. And nearly all of our services that are provided by BDS are funded solely by fees. Like Commissioner Ryan mentioned, it's 98%. Our overall goal in setting our fees is to cover the cost of providing those services. And also at the same time, when we implement changes, we want to do that in a predictable and a gradual manner. I want to remind the council that for quite a period of time, BDS didn't raise the fees. In the period from fiscal year 13-14 through 18-19, we didn't come to council to raise our fees because the revenues were high enough to cover the cost of providing our services. And on a couple of occasions, specifically in 16-17, we actually decreased some of our fees because, again, the goal of our agency is to maintain cost recovery and fiscal stability to continue to provide services to developers and homeowners and the community at large. However, in fiscal year 21-22 and what is expected to happen in beyond in 22-23 next fiscal year, we are expected to experience significant increases in personnel costs. A little bit of a background as far as what kind of costs the Bureau incurs. 70% of our costs are personnel costs. So any adjustments to personnel cost will result in overall increased cost in our bureau. And those increases in the current fiscal year and beyond are associated with changes in the labor agreements, inflation, cost of living adjustments. There's also increase in the mandatory purse contributions, and also there's also increases in cost for material and services. That's the non-personnel part of our costs. Right now, many fees that we charge are below the cost recovery. And what we're proposing is to make gradual changes to bring those fees to the level that where we can cover the cost of providing services. Our workload remains high. However, the large portion of our revenues come from large projects. And as Commissioner Ryan mentioned in his opening statement, the number and the valuation of large projects declined as a result of the pandemic. Office space, hotel space, large commercial projects are expected to be at a lower level for the several years. And again, due to ongoing inflation, decline in the construction activity, we've been drawing on our reserves for the last 2 years. And we drew approximately over $30 million since the start of the pandemic. Even with these proposed fee changes, this additional revenue is not expected to allow the Bureau to achieve 100% cost recovery in the fiscal year 2022-23. Maintaining that fiscal stability at BDS is absolutely essential to continue providing services to our customers, and also to further efforts to improve the city's permitting processes and timelines. When BDS has sufficient funding and staffing to meet that workload demand, we're better positioned to provide timely and efficient services, which will help facilitate economic growth in Portland. And I mentioned that in our budget presentation, how important the construction activity is overall for any economy, especially in Portland. Again, with any new building that is coming up, there's more housing, there are more new shops, restaurants, school, grocery stores, social events. So that makes the Portland a vibrant place to live, with healthy, exciting neighborhoods that will attract more investment in the city, and eventually it will affect also the general fund and permit revenue. We also have transitioned our services from in-person to online services, including electronic plan review, online permitting, the new mobile technology for our inspectors, and an online portal to pay for permits. 98% of our permits are actually are applied online right now, so which is a pretty huge achievement for the Bureau and for the city overall. These fee increases that we're proposing are already assumed in the BDS 5-year financial plan. BDS Financial Advisory Committee that convened in November of 2021 and again in January 2022. They reviewed the economic situation and advised updates to the revenue and to the fees in the financial plan. In most cases, again, we are keeping those increases as low and as gradual as possible in order not to act as a disincentive to customers seeking services and to overall development activity in Portland. Again, I want to reiterate the fee change goals that we're trying to achieve with this proposed ordinance is to maintain the staffing capacity at BDS and also provide support for BDS services and technology, and also for permit improvement work. And the last thing, again, I'm going to reiterate is to keep up with the rising costs. We're supportive of these gradual fee changes. So and all of these were posted on our website in advance to solicit feedback from our customers. With that, that concludes my presentation to you, and we're open to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Ryan.
Yeah, thank you, Elshad, for that presentation. Is there anyone else from the BDS providing testimony or doing the presentation, Elshad, or are you done?
No.
Okay, thanks.
Just me.
All right. So as you know, colleagues, we have an amendment that was proposed, so I think we should go ahead and read that before testimony so the public has the amendment. Do you have the amendment? You don't have the amendment. I was told it was given to the clerk.
Ness, do you have a copy of it?
I have what Darian provided. Would you like me to read that?
Yeah, that's the amendment. Thanks. I appreciate it.
So it's just amend Bureau of Development Services fees for type 1 historic reviews to gradually increase over the next 5 years instead of over 1 year, to bring this fee to cost recovery as outlined in the table in paragraph below.
Yes, that's the amendment. That's what I bring to the dais, and I know that was circulated with my colleagues.
I'll second the amendment. Commissioner Mapps, did you have a question?
I had a question about these.
And then could I just give a little bit of context on it, maybe? First?
Go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Welcome to live city council meetings. It was great. Colleagues, my office has circulated the background information about the amendment I'm proposing today for the type 1 historical review with all your offices, and the clerk has this information. Thank you for reading it. As it stands, Oregon law states a governing body shall establish fees charged for processing reviews at an amount not more than the actual or average cost of providing that service. The type 1 historic review is one of 300 different BDS fees being updated with this ordinance, and customers expect annual fee changes to take effect on July 1st. In Portland, land use services operate solely on application fees and must maintain sufficient staff to review these applications. The current charge for BDS fees related to type 1 historical review is about $331. Cost associated with type 1 historic review for the average staff time is $1,581. That's a differential of $1,250. It's a large gap, and we need to achieve cost recovery with our review fees. Instead of offering a disproportionate increase over 1 year, I am proposing that we amend the BDS fees for type 1 historical review to gradually increase a 5-year step period to get the fees closer to cost recovery. Remember, BDS has a long-standing fee waiver application program for low-income households, and you can contact BDS for the waiver and reduction. Let's get our city closer to cost recovery without placing an undue burden on our residents. Like many compromises, I realize no one side is getting exactly what they want today, and this gradual slope offers the best opportunity to move us forward. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Commissioner Ryan. Commissioner Mapps?
I just want to thank Commissioner Ryan for bringing forward this amendment. I've received a lot of communications from the public around the historic review fees. The amendment on the table looks like a satisfactory reform. Thank you.
Very good. Keelan, how many folks do we have signed up for public testimony?
3 people.
Very good. 3 minutes each. Name for the record.
First up, we have James Hewer.
Welcome.
Commissioners, my name is Jim Hoyer, and I'm here representing the Land Use Committee of the Irvington Community Association. I'm also one of the representatives on the Portland Coalition for Historic Resources. Just as a little background, in case you aren't aware of it, Irvington is one of the most economically diverse neighborhoods in the city. We have some of the very lowest and some of the very highest income census tracts in the city. And the south quarter of our neighborhood has a median income 20% below the city median. So we are affected by prices of things that we have to pay. I'm here to talk about the Type 1 historic review fees, and I'll make my remarks brief. Under State Law 227-175, that sets a ceiling, not a floor. And as it happens, and I've spoken to this council numerous times since 2013 on the subject, and the amount of fee recovery has actually increased dramatically. It once was well below 98%, and so nothing is actually decreed from on high. This is a decision by council over the years to let that number rise and rise continually. Now, as this type 1 reviews, HRCP, which you guys adopted in January, I think it was, and went into effect in March, greatly expanded the role of type 1 fees, including things that didn't used to be covered. As an example, solar, what's it called? Solar energy systems. Now, a lot of those were exempted, but you can still imagine if you don't comply with the criteria for exemption, you have to go to the BDS for a review of solar energy systems. That could be a huge, complex installation and require a significant amount of work on BDS part. But there's actually 8 different categories of type 1 review called for in HRCP. 2 of them are crucial to us, and those are the ones that limit the review to 150 square feet of alteration in residential zones and 50 feet, just 50 square feet, in non-residential zones. Those are not big changes, and they shouldn't require immense amounts of review. And the people who are making those changes and being charged the fees regard it as unfair and inappropriate to be charged an amount of money that comes close to the cost of the project itself. So what we're asking for today is to establish different levels of fees for the different kinds of type 1 review. Those 2 in particular should have a fixed fee. Now, it was originally set in 2013 for those small defined projects at $250. Well, over time, of course, that's been increased. But now the scope of type 1s has been expanded, and so many of those other things can't be confined to a $350 or $250 maximum. So that's why we're asking you to split those apart and keep a whole, at least on this little piece of this type 1, that relates to the small projects.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thank you
your
very much.
testimony. Next individual, please, Keelan.
Next up, we have Robert Butler. I believe they canceled their request, and then Brisa Gonzalez. Looks like they've also canceled. That completes testimony.
Very good, thank you. Could I ask a question of staff, please? So we just heard testimony that the number of projects that would be subject to this type of review have increased. Could you respond to that?
Kimberly, you're on the line, right?
Yes, I'm here.
I think this would be yours, right? Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, Kimberly Talent, Land Use Services Division Manager at BDS. I don't have the full code to walk through, but in general, my understanding is the Historic Resource Code project that Council just adopted did expand the amount of work that can be reviewed under the type 1 procedure. However, it did also expand exemptions to historic review. So it does provide a lot more work to instead go straight to building permit and not require that discretionary land use process.
Yeah, thank you for that, because I remember specifically testimony during this discussion that people wanted us to support the exemptions, and so we did. And so now I'm surprised to hear that people are saying we expanded the number and types of projects that are subject to this, and maybe it's just depending upon what kind of project you're trying to do.
Yeah, I believe some work actually used to be a little bit higher procedure type and now can be reviewed as under a type 1. So I don't know if I would represent it as an expansion of stuff that used to be exempt is now in review. It's more that stuff used to be a higher procedure type that can be reviewed.
And could you help me with one word that you just used? You said can. be reviewed? Is it a mandatory process or is it a subjective? What do you mean they can be reviewed? Does that mean they are reviewed or they might be reviewed?
Well, it kind of depends because it depends on how someone's designing their project and whether they're designing it to meet the allowances outlined in the exemptions, or whether they want to do something more than that. If they want to do more than what the exemption would allow for, then they would need to go through that land use.
Okay, and I'll dig a little deeper on this. This is obviously not something we're voting on today. While I've got the mic open, I also want to applaud Commissioner Ryan. I strongly support the effort to basically slowly work into the fee increase. I understand that it's the council policy to have this program be self-supporting, but I was not enthusiastic about the fee increase being implemented all in year one. I thought during a time of economic recovery that seemed like a pretty big pill for people to swallow. So I appreciate the fact that you've tiered this over a period of 5 years, Commissioner. Any further discussion on this before I move it to second? All right, we should take a vote on the amendment, or do you want to leave it open? Take the vote. Please call the roll on the amendment.
Ryan.
Aye.
Hardesty.
Aye.
Maps.
Aye.
Rubio.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye, the amendment is adopted. This is a first reading of a non-emergency ordinance. It moves to second reading. Thank you. Next item.
Accept Portland Bureau of Transportation Way to Go plan, moving people in Portland, a transportation demand management strategy to advance our mobility, climate, and equity goals.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm excited to introduce this next agenda item, which is accepting PBOT's Way to Go plan to set direction for PBOT's work on transportation demand management, also known as TDM. In a few minutes, PBOT staff will share information with you about this strategy to reduce drive-alone trips. But I want to kick off the discussion by reminding us all how critical this work is to reduce harmful climate emissions and advance equitable mobility in Portland. The Way to Go plan is PBOT's next step to move us as a city towards transportation justice, which means the combination of addressing climate change and addressing systemic racism. By favoring single occupancy car trips, our current system exacerbates transportation inequities. People living on low incomes have longer travel times, spend a higher proportion of their income on transportation, and have fewer transportation choices. The Way to Go plan sets out strategies to help change this. I'm excited to share some of these strategies today, including the key tools of pricing and financial incentives. The data and research says the two of the most essential strategies are 1, pricing driving, and 2, providing financial incentives for alternatives. And thanks to this council's action in February, when you approved PBOT's revenue plan and the 20-cent climate and equity transition fee for parking, we will have resources to provide these incentives through our transportation wallet, and we begin sending a pricing signal. That transaction fee begins on July 1st after council approves PBOT's fee schedule in 2 weeks. Now I will turn it over to Catherine Calaro and Liz Hortman to share information about the plan. Catherine, take it away.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Hardesty, Mayor, Commissioners. We appreciate the chance to share the Way to Go plan with you today. I'm Catherine Charlo. I manage PBOT's Active Transportation and Safety Division, which focuses on programs and services that give people travel choices. And actually underlying all the work that our division does is the concept of managing travel demand to make roads work more efficiently and to reduce single occupancy car trips and replace them with walking, rolling, bicycling, transit, and shared micromobility. Recently, the importance and
Excuse me, do you think we have a slideshow? Because it disappeared.
We do. This is just my introduction, and that will.
Okay, I'm
as soon as
sorry.
I'm
It
done,
was
we'll
up,
start.
then
No,
it
that's
away.
great.
My
Thank you,
apologies.
Liz, we'll do that. The importance and the challenge of this shift of trips was highlighted in a recent New York Times article whose title asked us, "Can Portland be a climate leader without reducing driving?" And unfortunately, the data says we can't. Our climate goals as a city have us reducing carbon emissions 50% by 2030 and then reaching net zero by 2050. But as you all know, we are not on track to do that, and carbon emissions from transportation are increasing, not decreasing. So it's that increase that sets the stage for the plan we're going to describe to you today. And also another thing that sets the stage is the effects we're feeling as a city of local climate change and the financial pinch and the resource pinch that we find us in. Both of these point us to a need to identify strategies that will work best to shift trips, as Commissioner Hardesty mentioned, to less polluting modes. I guess before we dive deeper into the Way to Go plan itself, which Liz is going to do, I do want to highlight the connection to transportation justice a little more. PBOT's larger strategic plan directs our work to be in service to two things: reducing carbon emissions and addressing systemic racism by removing barriers to equitable travel. Not surprisingly, those things are deeply intertwined. It turns out we can't shift driving trips throughout the city unless we address the effects of displacement, new travel patterns, and the need for personal safety, as well as traffic safety. So today we're sharing our work plan to tackle these interrelated challenges. We know this isn't new to you. We appreciate your actions in recent months to adopt the pricing for equitable mobility recommendations. And as Commissioner Hardesty reminded us, supporting PBOT's revenue strategy to advance climate and equity goals, including the climate and equity fee. We're grateful to you all for that support, and we're excited to share the plan as a next step in the work. And I'm going to turn it over to Liz Horman now to share the presentation.
Great, thank you. And we're having some technical difficulties. So Keelan, thank you so much for sharing that. So if you can go to the next slide. And hi, my name is Liz Horman. I'm a transportation demand management specialist with PBOT. And in our presentation today, we really want to ensure that you leave with an understanding of what is transportation demand management and why it's important for Portland. And we'll give you some background on this Way to Go plan and really highlight some of the most effective transportation demand management strategies that we need to be doing in Portland. Next slide, please. So as I begin, I just want to reiterate some of what you've heard from both Commissioner Hardesty and Catherine as to why the Way to Go plan is so important now. Simply put, we are falling short of our climate goals, and we can't reach our climate goals if people keep driving at the rates that the communities and households living on lower income and people that are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Next slide, please. And additionally, as you are well aware, we must address this urgent need of climate change while operating in a resource-constrained environment, both from a budget perspective, but also in the capacity of staff and community members in the implementation of solutions to address the climate crisis. So it was with these factors in mind that we embarked on the Way to Go plan, to develop a plan to tell us where to prioritize our resources in time and prioritize our resources and time to reduce driving and build an equitable transportation system. Next slide, please. Over the past 2 years, PBOT staff worked with transportation demand management experts, as well as community stakeholders and local practitioners to assess the most effective transportation demand management strategies for the Way to Go plan. And before I dive into the plan, I do want to set a little additional context on what is demand management and how the Way to Go plan was developed. Next slide, please. So we know that there's no one policy or program that will reverse greenhouse gas emissions or mitigate the impacts of climate change. Instead, it's going to take a multi-pronged approach to decarbonize the transportation system. This will include planning and building connected, resource-dense communities and shifting necessary vehicle trips to cleaner fuels and electric sources. However, we're here today to talk about one of the other key areas, which is reducing the miles driven in our city with demand management actions. Next slide, please. So now that we've said this wonky term, demand management, a lot, what is it? Well, demand management principles are well known in sectors beyond transportation. An example from the energy sector is where the implementation of behavior change strategies to reduce home and business energy consumption meant that we avoided the large costs of building new generators and transmission lines. Next slide, please. And transportation demand management is similar. By influencing behavior change through incentives and disincentives, these strategies aim to reduce the amount of car travel in our region so that we can continue to meet our mobility needs, even as the population grows. And we can do this without building expensive new roads that increase transportation carbon emissions. Next slide, please. Demand management is not new and is really core to what the Bureau does. But we've also recently done some really important new work with things like Rose Lanes and the transportation wallet. But to make the best and most efficient use of our resources and community partner energy, we must prioritize and do more. We're known as a national leader in demand management, but our work can have even more impact. So it's this way to go plan that will tell us what are the strategies that are most effective at reducing driving, while also addressing the structural barriers to mobility so we can put the time and resources into the most effective actions. Next slide, please. And the way to go plan, as Catherine mentioned, is grounded in transportation justice, where all of our transportation demand management work must be focused on reducing vehicle miles traveled and addressing climate change, and reducing the structural barriers to using transportation options, particularly for Black, Indigenous, people of color, households living on lower incomes, and people with disabilities. Next slide, please. So now that you know why and how we developed the plan, I want to move now to highlighting the key takeaways from the plan. Next slide, please. First, the way to go plan tells us that we need a toolbox of strategies in order to truly manage demand and make non-drive alone transportation modes easier, more reliable, and accessible to all. We'll need a toolkit of strategies that support people getting around outside their private vehicles. Therefore, the way to go plan identifies these 9 strategic priority areas that represent the buckets of demand management actions that we should be doing more of in the city to meet our goals. Next slide. And second, while an entire toolbox of strategies is needed, the way to go plan very clearly identifies 2 key strategy areas as being the most important and critical to reducing driving while building an equitable transportation system. Next slide, please. The first is pricing driving trips. And then when we say this, we mean through tolling, cordons, or road user charges, and pricing parking. All of the research, modeling, and lived experience from existing programs shows that pricing is a critical and effective demand management strategy that reduces vehicle miles driven. By sending a strong price signal, it helps to capture costs of driving and encourages shifts to safer, more sustainable modes. You've already heard a lot about pricing strategies and how strategies move us towards a more equitable transportation system from the pricing options for Equitable Mobility Task Force and the recommendation report. But it's really worth repeating that this way to go plan process identified pricing as a critical demand management strategy that will reduce car driving in our city. Next slide, please. And the second critical strategy area is around financial incentives, or providing people with transportation options at reduced costs or for free. Financial incentives are a powerful tool because they can do a lot of things, including helping people try new modes to travel, like in our recent free Biketown weekend for Earth Day, let people try out Biketown and use it for free. And we saw huge ridership numbers from that weekend. Financial incentives also reduce barriers of cost to transportation, like in our affordable housing transportation wallet that you've heard about, and our Biketown for All program, which offers reduced rates for people living on lower incomes. Financial incentives are also a key to making our pricing strategies more equitable. And finally, financial incentives are a great way to get our private partners involved in demand management work through things like employee benefit programs. Next slide, please. Next, to increase the effectiveness of pricing financial incentives, non-driving modes must be more available and accessible, because we cannot expect people to drive less if there aren't sufficient options available or reliable enough to get people where they need to go. Things like frequent, reliable transit or expanded service areas for our shared micromobility. And we must also prioritize and redistribute space for people using non-driving modes to improve safety, accessibility, and reliability of people movement in things like rose lanes and our multimodal infrastructure to create safe crossings and the like. Again, broadening our demand management toolbox will enhance our effectiveness at reducing barriers to transportation options while also reducing driving. Next slide, please. The fourth key takeaway from the plan is that the COVID-19 pandemic has had a real impact on how we travel. And while we're still learning about any lasting trends, there are a few things we do know and that we should be taking into account. First, trips on shared micromobility like Biketown and shared e-scooters originally plummeted in early 2020 due to the stay-at-home orders. However, we're currently seeing our highest ridership numbers ever and are back above pre-pandemic ridership. Two, we're likely to see some continuation of hybrid work, meaning our definition of commuting for some does include telework. But there are other employees and workers that have had to travel throughout the pandemic and will continue to do so, and those modes should be prioritized. Three, transit ridership is increasing, but at a much slower rate than other modes, and is still being impacted by staffing shortages and service reductions. And finally, unfortunately, traffic volumes have continued to rise despite a dip early on in the pandemic, and traffic fatalities are trending upwards as well. Next slide, please. Our final key takeaway is that the Way to Go plan says that we must do a better job at co-creating, designing, and implementing programs in true partnership with communities. And we must do a better job at focusing on the demand management actions that reduce and remove the structural barriers for those people using transportation options. In our outreach, we heard from community that they face barriers like cost, unreliable, unavailable, and infrequent transportation options, and key access barriers like technology or cell phone requirements to access, information only being provided in English, and also credit card requirements for signing up for these modes. Next slide, please. And we also heard time and time again that one of the primary barriers to using active transportation and transit is that people, especially those in Portland's BIPOC communities, do not feel safe in the streets. So if we're going to move forward and be effective in our demand management work to achieve our climate, mobility, safety, and equity goals, we must make a stronger commitment to invest in projects and programs that make an advancement towards a safer environment for all people moving about in the city. Programs like our Portland Street Response Team, PBOT's Personal Safety Campaign, and Streetcar's Rider Ambassador Program, offering community support on board the streetcar, are all important examples and are a good start. But we must do more in this work by acknowledging past harms and reducing disparities to build power in communities to remove barriers to equitable and accessible mobility. Next slide, please. So with that, this means that the Way to Go plan says we must prioritize these actions to reduce driving and advance our climate, equity, mobility, and safety goals. And we must do these things while centering personal safety in the right of way. Next slide, please. Therefore, the resolution that's in front of you asks Council to accept the Way to Go plan and acknowledge transportation demand management strategies are key to advancing the city's climate, mobility, safety, and equity goals. Two, it says, asks Council to recognize the criticality of pricing as a demand management strategy and direct PBOT to develop new pricing policies that are in accordance with the equitable mobility principles outlined in the POEM Task Force report. And finally, to direct PBOT to invest in financial incentive strategies that are guided by our demand management principles and in collaboration with community stakeholders. And I will note that we're already moving forward with this final one. As directed by the Council resolution that passed in February, you supported our PBOT revenue strategy, which included the parking, climate, and equitable mobility transaction fee. That small fee will go towards making our popular affordable housing transportation wallet program permanent and expand to serve more people in Portland, along with going towards other transportation affordability programs. Next slide, please. So thank you again for your time today. We do have a few invited testimony that can go, or I'm happy to take questions before if you wish. Thank you.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Mayor, do you want us to take invited testimony now?
Why don't we go ahead and do the invited testimony in case people have other obligations today, and then we can hold our questions till after invited testimony. And then,
Thank you.
See if there's open testimony as well.
Excellent. Let's hear from invited testimony. Are you ready to present? Okay, here they come.
Hello, good morning. My name is Robert Scofield. I'm a Resident Services Coordinator for REACH CDC and a graduate student in Portland State University's School of Social Work. I'm honored to speak on behalf of Portland Bureau of Transportation. It was like a weight off my shoulders. Programs like this help my mental health. I don't have to worry about how to get to a doctor's appointment. These are just some of the things recipients of the Transportation Wallet have shared with me about its impact on their lives. I work in affordable housing apartment buildings in downtown. Many of our residents are BIPOC or from other historically marginalized communities. They live with disabilities and are low or sometimes even zero income. We help connect them with the resources they need to maintain stable lives. Getting where they needed to go on limited means posed a constant challenge, and while we could get them some TriMet day passes, we couldn't guarantee their availability. The Transportation Wallet pilot program changed that. As one of PBOT's 8 housing partners in 2021, REACH's participating properties saw a surge of demand as soon as it was announced. The slots we were given filled quickly, and about as many were added to the wait list. Luckily, PBOT was able to get wallets to all of those who wanted them. It gave our residents the freedom of movement. Not only that, it gave them the flexibility of choice. They could opt for unlimited rides with a 1-year reduced fare pass, or they could get Bike Town for All or Adaptive Bike Town memberships and prepaid Visa card that covered e-scooter, rideshare, and taxi journeys if they preferred. It was all about what fit their needs. I've witnessed firsthand the positive impact the program has had on folks who don't usually get these kinds of opportunities. In a time of record inflation, removing the cost of transportation from the equation is a vital step towards supporting those of us who are well below the city's median income level. Continuing and even expanding the Transportation Wallet for residents of affordable housing program will put mobility freedom within the grasp of all Portlanders. I ask that the Council accept PBOT's Way to Go plan. Thank you for your time.
Guess that means I'm up. Good morning, Mayor Weiler. Good morning, Commissioner Hardesty, Commissioner Rubio, Commissioner Mapps, and Commissioner Ryan. Thank you all so much for the opportunity to be here. And thank you to Liz and Catherine and the entire Way to Go team for all of your work. For the record, my name is Andre Lightsey Walker, and I use he, him pronouns, and I am here on behalf of the Street Trust. And for folks who are tuned in and unfamiliar with the Street Trust, we are a member-based nonprofit organization that advocates for multimodal transportation options. We prioritize modes that ensure safety, accessibility, racial equity, and climate justice. So thanks again. I was last here a few months back celebrating the work of the Poem Task Force. And during that testimony, I shared that the most important thing about the Poem policy implementation is the collective effort to change behavior. And I'd like to reiterate that today. Humans are rational beings. We like being comfortable, and frequently we opt for the path of least resistance. And this practice applies to the vast majority of things we do, from the foods we choose to eat, to which shows we pick on Netflix, and of course, how we make decisions about our day-to-day transportation. So today, many of us find ourselves in a system that has reinforced the single-person car trip. We've built an entire industry around it and contorted our cities in a fashion that prioritizes the movement of gas-guzzling metal boxes, not the beautiful individual and loving little creatures piloting them. Us. Collectively, we've subsidized the transportation system and have often made hopping in your car alone the easiest and most comfortable way to get around. Through decades of policymaking and imbalanced infrastructure investment, our auto-centric system has continued to reinforce itself and has made imagining alternatives more and more difficult. Lucky for us, we have an amazing collection of people in our region and city, across sectors, working to create a world where mobility is centered on people and communities, with an emphasis on a connected and diverse system of reliable options. The Way to Go plan is an example of this collective knowledge and cultural movement, and can serve as a blueprint for how you as a council can continue to provide people with the options they need. You have the power to support, incentivize, and invest in the sort of transportation behavior and infrastructure that's necessary to ensure that the elements of Portland we love so much are here for generations to come. And I say that as a fourth generation Portlander. Thanks to the technology and tracking capability of the day, it's not a mystery where we're failing. Nearly 40% of Oregon's greenhouse gas emissions are from the transportation sector. And every month, we add more names to a growing list of lives lost to traffic violence. And although it's hard to sit with the tragedies that emerge from a broken system, we are privileged to have this information and burdened with the responsibility to create a system that works. And as you know, Portland is a city that loves planning. We love planning about planning, and maybe even planning about planning to plan. Well, plans need teeth. They need community accountability. They need realistic timelines and adequate funding to implement. We need measures in place that demonstrate we're achieving our intended outcomes, or to show that there's still work to be done. In addition to great plans, we need great action. We need commitment to making investments that save lives. We need commitment to improving mobility, and we need commitment to expanding opportunities to the people and neighborhoods our current system neglects. So as you move forward with the adoption of the Way to Go plan, I ask that you also make a commitment to supporting the diverse range of policies and practices highlighted within the plan, remembering our foundational goal, shifting behavior to support the creation of a more equitable, diverse, and sustainable transportation system. And when you feel a little bit of tension, facing backlash from drivers angry about policies that will make it more expensive to drive or park in the city, just remember me. Imagine my face if you need to. We've been undercharging and over-incentivizing driving for the last 100 years. It's about time to try a different approach. So this Sunday, the Street Trust will be honoring someone who was not afraid of taking a different approach. Mayor Bud Clark will be leading a bright procession in his honor, and we'd love for you to join us if you're available. I thank you all so much for your time and hope you have a wonderful Wednesday.
Does that conclude our public testimony?
We do have one more person signed up for invited testimony. There's Sarah.
Yeah, just to be clear, this is invited, and then we also have open testimony. So if you haven't heard your name, don't panic yet.
Thank you. Mayor Weiler and Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to comment today. I'm Sarah Wright, Transportation Program Director at Oregon Environmental Council. OEC is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, membership-based organization that works to advance innovative, collaborative, and equitable solutions to Oregon's environmental challenges for today and future generations. And as often happens to me, I'm going to be echoing some of Andre's comments in a much less eloquent and compelling way, so just please bear with me. This happens to me a lot. As you know, Portland is far behind on reaching its climate goals, and transportation is critical to changing that trajectory. The decision-making framework laid out in this plan is a platform on which the city can build a transformational new approach to transportation. OEC strongly supports this framework, and we strongly recommend that you not only accept the Way to Go plan today, but immediately move to implement it. We've built an existing transportation system that takes up an enormous amount of public and private space, pollutes the air, destroys climate stability, and kills and maims people. This status quo provides mobility for those who are physically and financially able to buy, fuel, insure, maintain, and drive a private vehicle, and provides only dangerous, limited, inconvenient choices for everyone else. It creates a context in which people are forced to get around in ways that endanger and inconvenience themselves and everyone around them, as well as future generations. We have normalized this and accepted all these externalized costs to our communities. The status quo is built on a foundation of ideas and expectations established in the middle of the last century by a very small club of auto industry executives and engineers. It begins with the assumption that we all get around in private vehicles all the time, and that this is natural and good and should be enabled as much as possible. We've known for a long time that this assumption is wrong. The status quo is inequitable, unsustainable, and inefficient. Even if all these vehicles did not pollute our air, destabilize the climate, and kill and maim people, we just don't have space in a city environment to accommodate everybody in private vehicles. In order to support a city transportation system that actually works to move people and goods as the population grows, we can't just add a few extra bike lanes and curb cuts and bus signal prioritizations to the existing system. We have to recenter our whole system on people and goods, not on vehicles. At this moment, facing both the climate crisis and deeply inequitable distribution of burdens and benefits in our transportation system, it's time to let go of the past and turn to the future we want. The resolution before you lays out a foundation for a different approach that does exactly that. The Way to Go plan is founded on strong data and on connections to people's individual and community needs. I recommend that you adopt this plan and keep going from there. Don't let it sit on the shelf. As Andre said, we like to plan and plan and plan. It's time to act. So we're asking you to make it matter, put money and power behind it. We can't afford to wait. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
So that completes invited testimony. Is that correct, Catherine?
Yes, it is.
Very good. Keelan, how many people do we have signed up?
We have 3 people signed
Very
up.
good. 3 minutes each. Name for the record, please.
First up, we have Terry Parker.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Terry Parker. I'm also a fourth-generation Portlander on my dad's side. As unintended consequences, both RIP and HB 2001 are in part responsible for increased land and single-family home prices and the loss of urban tree canopy. Portland can hardly be called a Sherwood Forest. Yet with Robin Hood-like aspirations, PBOT's Way to Go plan is more like adopting a socialist dictatorship that extorts money from drivers and working-class families. Since there is little no motorist-specific representation seats at the table on PBOT citizen and advisory committees, including the POEM Task Force, the plan was developed without equitable representation and input from the taxpayers that keep the economy humming. Not all voices being heard is typical of the anti-car biased leadership at PBOT. History clearly demonstrates that higher rates of personal liability, such as driving, significantly creates greater economic productivity, which in turn generates family wage jobs. The consequences of adding more fees to driving and delivery costs will increase the rate of inflation. This includes increased food prices, a rise in construction costs, higher service fees, etc. Picking and choosing which category of drivers pay the fees is also a form of discrimination. Missing is any financial accountability from the alternative mode users. $13 million for Nato Parkway Bikeway, another $13 million for the bicycle ped bridge over I-85. or 84, $1.9 million when the Morrison Bridge bike lane was added, and not a penny directly coming from the bicyclists. As for transit, one 2-axle bus does as much damage to the roadways as 1,200 cars. On 82nd Avenue, where TriMet made 223 trips a day in 2019, it would have taken 267,600 cars in a 24-hour period traveling the entire length of the street to do the same amount of roadway wear and tear. Pre-pandemic transit fares barely covered 25% of the operating costs, whereas general equitable mobility also requires equitable financial accountability. Instead of fleecing more dollars from motorists to fund the alternatives, freeloading bicyclists need to be taxed to pay their own way, and transit needs to become more financially self-sustainable. The underlying cause of climate change is unsustainable population growth and the overhuman population of the planet. Air travel accounts for 20% of carbon emissions. Both are being left out of the conversation, as is the shift to electric cars that will add another oops for a higher rate of inflation. With PBOT's social engineering war against the automobile, and if she passed out these, I've got them listed, congestion is increased, which in turn increases both fuel consumption and emissions. What PBOT does best is waste taxpayer dollars that are recklessly spent. This plan is not the way to go. It is a bully pulpit dictatorial politics aimed at overriding freedom of choice. What PBOT should be doing is making entire streets flow better, thereby improving mobility for all users. Thank you.
Next up, we have Robert Butler.
Good morning, Council.
Morning.
Hardworking Council members. This is Robert Butler, resident of Portland, again. I want to take a more moderate approach than PBOT is taking on this litany of 100 pages of, I think, good reading, necessary reading, but unfortunately, it comes from the side that is known as extremist in climate control, and we need moderation, not extremism. So I'm going to suggest more moderation. I want to start out by saying that it is a good read, although the many references from our liberal friends like Seattle, San Francisco, and Los Angeles, which gives it a one-sided spin. But I wanted to mention that we have a credibility gap with PBOT right now all over the city, as we seem to be heading into a transportation system in ruins. And I do want to mention about PBOT. I'm very disappointed on allowing TriMet to choose in its bid for buses for Division Street, the super buses. They had the bids for electric buses and for diesel buses. They could have had either one. They chose the diesel. So we have 31 diesel buses running on Division Street soon for a cost of $27 million, average life 14 years, polluting Division Street. And PBOT has not condoned this terrible event. Rather, they have supported it. They have worked hard to put in this Division Street project, which is a disaster. And we have the 31 buses on their way, contract for another 111 buses, super buses, coming, total of over $100 million worth of buses, none of which are all diesel. And so I think that's very regrettable that we have a reputation of PBOT preceding this, what I will call a treatise of over 100 pages of the Church of Transportation. I suggest that we get away from this Bible, look for more moderation and economic justice for all instead of transportation justice for some. Thank you.
Next up, we have Tony Jordan.
Good morning, commissioners. My name is Tony Jordan, and as you might guess, if parking is mentioned 3 times in a hearing, I'm going to show up on the testimony list. This plan looks really nice, and it's great. It's a great overview. I almost call it a greatest hits of other plans that we have adopted already. And I do want to acknowledge all and thank the staff at PBOT and at the city for all those programs that we have implemented so far, such as the transportation wallet, which I love, Rose Lanes, climate action fee. But as usual, I'm here to press you to act with greater urgency. These plans must come with funding and with commitments for accountability of reducing greenhouse gases, emissions, and car trips. Indeed, this plan leans heavily on the POEM recommendations. I was a member of that task force, which we passed in October. And the top line recommendation from the POEM task force was parking cash out, flexible commuter benefits, which is a policy that requires employers that voluntarily pay for parking to offer an equitable subsidy for workers who don't drive. This is a policy that should cost the city nothing to implement. It puts cash in Portlanders' pockets. There's examples of it from other cities, and it's effective at shifting commute modes. And it would be most effective to put something like that in place before people return to the office. Unfortunately, we've gotten several bites at that apple with the pandemic, but I still don't know that there is an actionable plan in place to implement parking cash out. And we're already 7 months into the 2-year short-term timeline for POEM. I've been involved in this kind of policy now for probably about 10 years, and I've helped make a lot of plans, several of which are in this document, which I'm going to call yet another plan or a YAP, and hopefully not, but potentially soon to be a not yet implemented plan or a YIP. We know where we need to go, but we're like a kid trying on a diving board, trying to get psyched up to jump off, producing yet another plan after yet another plan. Yip, yap, yip, yap, yip, yap. Meanwhile, car infrastructure projects plod along, burning mountains of cash on bridge and highway planning and construction, all in service of the status quo. So I just think it's time to start yipping and yapping, stop yipping and yapping, and start acting on these plans. We have climate and mode shift goals we aren't meeting. This is great, but we have plans we need, as mentioned by my colleagues, we have plans we need to implement. We need to do that quickly and urgently. So thank you very much, and I hope to see these things in action soon.
And that completes testimony.
All right, very good. Thank you, everybody who testified. today on this. Colleagues, this is a resolution, so we will be taking a vote on it today. Are there any questions for staff? Commissioner Ryan.
Sure. I have a question. It was mentioned many times, and I appreciate, thank you for the presentation, by the way, to reduce drive-alone trips. So do you have metrics on that? That I just didn't see that chart.
I'm going to have Liz answer that question in terms of plan development. And then Commissioner, if that doesn't answer your question, we can do our best to get metrics or just better understand what you're asking for. But Liz, I'll turn it over to you to talk about how we thought about that during plan development.
Yeah, thank you. So, the Portland Bureau of Transportation does have, some metrics on transportation emissions, and that we also, when we talk about transportation emissions and sort of efficiency, knowing that drive-alone trips are ones that are adding sort of the most of the emissions. So we use drive-alone trips in that context. I can talk to our data performance team about getting specific numbers for you, but we were using drive-alone again in that context of transportation emissions and knowing that primarily those emissions are coming from those single occupancy vehicles.
Okay, so right now the answer is no, and that's okay. It sounds like it might be pretty complicated, but I do hope that you will figure out perhaps how to provide that metric, because all the testimony kept going to that point. And so if we want to measure, when you measure matters, and if we want to measure this to make sure that we have success and we have some goals, it would be great to figure out how to provide those metrics. Would you agree with that?
I can answer that and say absolutely. And actually, one of the things we have recently established is an Office of Performance Monitoring and Management. And a big thing that group is wrestling with is exactly the type of question you're asking. How do we measure mode shift? It's not easy, but we need to get our arms around it. We know we need to get our arms around it. And happy to come back to you and share as we develop strategies on what to measure and where to get that data, just to get your input on it.
I appreciate the complexity, and a theme, I guess, for the whole presentation is let's just do it. It won't be perfect, but it's better to have something than nothing. So I'm rooting for you.
That.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you for that question, Commissioner Ryan. I was actually going to say, I do think what we're doing is looking at this from a regional transportation system, because you may know that at some point in our near future, there'll be tolls on most of the bridges in the Portland metro area. And so we really have to be intentional about incentivizing people getting out of their automobile, especially when they don't have to be. And so it's not going to be perfect. But I can commit that we're certainly going to be making changes as we adjust, as the community adjusts. I mean, what we're talking about, just like with 911, is having people change behavior, right? And not just assume that getting in an automobile is the right thing to do. But I love the idea that we're going to be increasing opportunities with the transportation wallet, because that really does give us the opportunity to make sure that transportation justice is accessible to all the community members who need it most. So great job, Peabody. I really appreciate the presentation today and the fabulous community testimony. Thank you.
Just one other question kind of connected to that, and that's one of the barriers is personal safety and security, but I didn't hear much beyond that. Can you speak to that further? And I asked that question, and I was waiting for more information on that, because I know in my neighborhood, I live near a MAX line, and the neighbors continue to tell me that they miss taking the MAX, but they don't feel safe. So it's a thing out there, and I want to make sure that we're addressing the personal safety issue. And I know it was one of your barriers, but I wanted to hear more about that.
Maybe I'll take a first stab at it, and Liz can add to that. There's a couple of concrete things we have been doing that Liz mentioned briefly in the proposal. One does go to that transit question, the transit security question, although it's on the system that we have control over, which is the streetcar system. And we have what we call rider ambassadors, who are a non-police, non-enforcement oriented group who are really intended to engage with folks on the streetcars and increase that sense of personal security without taking a strictly enforcement approach. We're also have done some internal work within PBOT to raise awareness about this personal safety, the criticality of personal safety if we're asking people to shift trips. And we have what we call our Realized Safety campaign. To date, it has been largely internal. We expect it to move more externally in the next year or so. And that's partly a way, as I say, to raise awareness. You'd be surprised how many people haven't yet wrapped their mind around the fact that there are a lot of people who don't feel safe in the right of way. And then we have some resources that we distribute through community partners to help people respond in crisis situations, help with de-escalation training, just trying to get to some of those more concrete factors that can help people feel more prepared to move around in the right of way. And then we continue to have our Safe Routes to School work and the programs related to that, which connect parents, kids moving together through the right of way, which can really make a big difference as well. All of those are pretty tactical answers. We're also in the process of developing what we're calling Beyond Traffic Safety work, another plan, the Yip Yap plan. But in all honesty, it's so new that without setting out some planning, some objectives, some data collection, we're not going to be able to come up with a good answer to your question. And we're working on that internally, that strategy, and we'll undoubtedly be sharing it with you all in the next year.
I appreciate it. I think the community-wide indicators that all of us could get behind will be helpful. Thanks.
Yeah. Liz, did you have anything more to add?
No, I think the only thing is, Catherine, you provided that good context on the tactical of some of the things that we're doing to address it. I think the only thing I wanted to reiterate that was part of this process for the Way to Go plan was, broadening who we were talking to in the community about how they get around Portland and the barriers they face. And so this was also, again, using to uplift some of those key barriers so we could then start creating these actions to address it. And so personal safety was one of them. Again, cost was another key barrier. So we're using that important input to then create the actions and the programs to address them.
Very good. I have a couple of questions. First of all, this is a resolution, and there are, it seems, some assumptions about future funding worked into this. So I want to be clear for the record that if I vote for this resolution, I am assuming every component of this program comes back to the City Council prior to being funded. Is that accurate?
I assume so. Maybe it would be, I don't want to over promise on sort of little, like if we are working internally on the Beyond Traffic Safety plan would be a great.
No, that's not my point. I assume that PBOT will continue to do the work you do and collaborate with the partners you collaborate with and strategize. But my point here is I don't want somebody to come back to council a year from now or 2 years from now and say you committed to funding X, because that's not what I'm ready to do today. I want to be very crystal clear on the record about that.
That is not the intention of the resolution, but I would let the commissioner speak to this as well.
Yes, thank you for that question, Mayor. And I agree. Today, we're not asking you to fund our plan. We are actually asking you to accept a vision about where we think we're going. And as you know, we got a little bit more work to do before we come back with those strategies. And they will be informed by our other regional transportation partners as well. Because I'm like you, I don't want to overburden people who I already know will be paying tolls, and they'll have all kind of new expenses that are the new reality. And so I share that concern of yours. But today, what we're doing is actually, if you adopt this resolution, what you're saying is that you believe that we should be moving towards a more climate resilient transportation system in the city of Portland. And before any big financial commitment is made, of course, we would have to come back to the City Council.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody here would oppose that. I just want to make sure that there's nothing in the resolution that commits a future council to any particular action. I want to make sure that they have the full ability to be able to weigh those actions independently, as well as the funding associated with those actions, because there are not currently estimates associated with this resolution. And I somewhat knew the answer, Commissioner. You and I have both been here on the dais before when somebody has come to the microphone and said, well, you committed 5 years ago to funding this. And that is not the purpose of a resolution, and I just want to make that clear on the record. My second question is really around transit. And this is interesting because it came up yesterday as part of our council discussion. There are significant assumptions around personal behavior. And since this plan is rooted in equity, and since we know that lower income Portlanders are being displaced to the farthest reaches of our city and even into Gresham, the decision that one would make individually to not drive into the city would in large measure be dependent upon there being a good alternative. And as of today, there is not a good alternative. I hope I'm not offending anybody when I say that about a regional public transit system, but it would not support wide-scale mobility migration to public transit as it currently stands. So I guess my question is, are we working with TriMet? Are we somehow coordinating this strategy of, quote, disincentivizing personal vehicle use and at the same time creating a viable, reliable alternative? Because right now that reliable alternative doesn't exist. So I think it's asking a lot for people to abandon their vehicles if the only way they can get to work or get their kids to school is with a vehicle.
To your point, Mayor, I'm happy to speak to that point unless somebody from PBOT wants to jump in when I'm done. Let me just say that you're absolutely right, which is why we expanded Biketown into areas of the city who have a transportation deficit. It is why we are making sure that the transportation wallet will actually fund public transit opportunities. Yes, we are working with TriMet around several of the major transportation projects, including the I-5 Bridge replacement project, as well as the 82nd Avenue redevelopment. So I can guarantee you that we're having these conversations on an almost daily basis about how we integrate a regional transit system, keeping in mind those who've been pushed out to the very edges of the city. So I'm with you there.
I appreciate that. And I want to be clear, there's a lot of good incentive in this program, and I appreciate that there is a clear attempt to encourage through incentives mode shift. And the transportation wallet's one example, and some of the other things that the commissioner talked about in her introduction, as well as the work you're doing around safe routes and improving safety. I think all of those are very positive. My third area is simply a statement. It's not really a question. We obviously have fragmented government under our current arrangement, and sometimes the right hand and the left hand aren't fully communicating. And this is one area where I think it is critical that we communicate with all of our bureaus and our community partners around the economic recovery of this city. Our city is not recovered, and we are spending a considerable amount of time through our economic development efforts to get people to come back to the central city and encouraging people to shop, to participate, to enjoy our public spaces, and recover from both the social and the economic impacts of the pandemic. And I want to make sure that as we talk about increasing the cost of being able to come to the central city, we're not working around our own, against our own interests in terms of helping small businesses in particular recover from the pandemic. And so I assume that as you come back to the council, you will have coordinated with our economic development agency, as well as small business owners and operators and the neighborhood business districts and others who are deeply concerned about the lack of people coming back to the central city. And I want to be clear, when I'm saying central city, I'm not saying downtown. The central city includes all of the east side, the Lloyd district, the central east side industrial area, northwest, and other parts of the city. But I just want to say, as I hear this presentation, while it's a great strategy long-term to combine incentives with a regulatory approach to achieve our long-term climate goals, it sounds a little bit tone deaf compared to the other efforts we're currently working on to see our city recover economically. Thank you. Any, Commissioner Maps, did you have your hand raised?
No.
Very good. So this is a resolution. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Keelan, please call the roll.
Ryan.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty, for the work that you've done with your PBOT staff, namely Catherine and Liz from the Way to Go planning team, to bring forward this transportation strategy with the noble goal of decreasing drive-alone trips. As it was stated, adult behavior change is very difficult to accomplish, and usually that actual behavior change is a bottom line to measure when it comes to urgently improving the population results we seek. As such, I look forward to the data sets that we can track along with the community. I also want to thank the community members and partners engaged in this project. I appreciate the invited testimony. The holistic approach to this work is appreciated. I accept the resolution. Aye.
Hardesty.
Mayor, I really appreciated your statement. And let me just say, climate change is real. And what we're rebuilding coming back much suggests the fact that the climate is dying. And if we don't act radically, we will not actually have an impact on that in our lifetime. And it's not mutually exclusive coming back economically. Many folks haven't come back, haven't even started the path coming back yet. I think of the J District as one of the core business districts in the city of Portland, and they've been suffering since the beginning of the pandemic and continue to suffer. So this is not about punitive behavior. This is about acknowledging that we're in a climate crisis, and we must change behavior if we're ever going to get out of it. And again, this is a vision about where we're moving. The more we do a deep dive, the more information we'll come back to the council with. But let me leave you with no doubt, we will be forced to make hard choices because we can continue to do what we've always done and somehow expect different outcomes, or we can actually fundamentally set a vision about where we're headed. I'm all about setting a vision for where we're headed, not actually reinforcing things that are killing our planet. So I am very happy to vote aye on this, and I look forward to the continued dialogue among my colleagues in city bureaus, but we cannot let recovery be at the expense of climate mitigation. I vote aye.
Maps.
Aye.
Rubio.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty and PBOT staff for bringing this plan forward. I also want to thank Catherine and Liz for the presentation and the community members that crafted this plan over the last 2 years. As a city, all of our climate action must be accelerated and aggressive, and it must be rooted in justice. And achieving those three objectives can be especially challenging when we're talking about a cityscape that has been made for, and as our testifier said, has incentivized people to use cars to meet their daily needs. And our city bureaus are working to plan connected neighborhoods with essential services close by in our planning work currently. But in the meantime, curbing transportation emissions means supporting more efficient ways to move people and providing convenient, reliable, and affordable options for our community members reliant on non-auto forms of transportation. So I'm happy to see that this plan is in this direction and does that, and I'm happy to see alignment with the PALM recommendations. I'm also very appreciative of the conversation with my colleagues and eager to continue this dialogue about how it integrates with our economic landscape of today, and also ready to see how we can implement some of these ideas into future cross-bureau work. I vote aye.
Weiler.
Not to restate all the questions I stated, but getting people to rely on non-auto forms of transportation requires the existence of non-auto forms of transportation that are reliable and cost-effective, because ultimately, particularly in a time of record inflation, people are going to make decisions based on the economics of their family unit. And we have to acknowledge that reality if we want this to be successful. So I too, Commissioner, I appreciate this conversation. I appreciate the excellent presentation that PBOT brought forward this morning. I think it both gives us a North Star to shoot for, and the conversation, I think, clearly lays out with a degree of concreteness some of the challenges that we're going to have to overcome for this to actually be successful. But as a first step, I vote aye. The resolution is adopted. Thank you. And with that, we will move to the regular agenda. Item 379, please.
Direct bureaus to take necessary steps to restore and return the Thompson Elk Fountain to its original condition and location.
Commissioner Ryan.
Colleagues, here we are, and I am very excited to be before you today in partnership with Commissioner Rubio to bring forward a resolution. I love it. Did you put it? Oh, you put it on your computer. To bring forward a resolution.
For the last hour, we are all wondering, why does Commissioner Ryan have antlers on his screen?
You're like, what is this?
Yeah, what the heck is it Christmas? Did I miss it? I was like, didn't know what was going on.
It's okay. But see, there's others a part of the herd out there.
I just thought that, we have weird people show up at city council all the time. So I just like.
And sometimes weird people sitting right next to you.
I didn't question it.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, today we have antlers. Cool.
All right, isn't it
My
nice to hear?
apology,
No, I love it. We're actually laughing and being in the same room together. I've been on this council a year and a half. That hasn't happened.
All morning I've been trying to figure out what's going on here.
Yeah.
Now I get it. I caught up. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Some days I'm a little slow, but most days not.
So in partnership with Commissioner Carmen Rubio, I bring forward a resolution that will restore Portland's beloved Thompson Elk Fountain to its original home, just outside this building in the heart of our city's civic affairs district. I want to start by thanking my Chief of Staff, Kelly Torres, for her leadership and partnership with her partner Chief of Staff. There you are, right out there, Jillian Schoen, Chief of Staff for Commissioner Rubio's team. Portland Parks Foundation, led by Randy Gregg, and I also want to acknowledge Jeff Hawthorne for his guidance with RAC, and to the bureaus, and there are a few of them, BDS, Parks, Water, PBOT, who have all been engaged in this work, and to all my colleagues on the council for your engagement in this item. Together, we've come together to ensure that our city is able and ready to return our iconic Thompson Elk Fountain. Colleagues, the Thompson Elk Fountain is the second oldest piece of public art in the city of Portland. And for more than 120 years, the elk has welcomed Portlanders and visitors alike and represented our continued vitality as a community. Little trivia moment. Do you all know what the oldest piece of public art is?
No, tell us.
Oh, wait, Commissioner Maps, ding, ding, ding. Did you say yes?
I think I do.
What is it?
Is it Skidmore Fountain?
You win some. You can have my antlers at the end.
No, that's okay.
All right. All right. It's a Skidmore Fountain. Community members said to my office that returning the elk, return of the elk in any form other than its original state would leave a scar on our city, and I agree with that. Today, we can take action to return the Thompson Elk Fountain to its original condition to the extent which is feasible, and I will now turn the mic off to my partner on this journey, Commissioner Rubio.
Thank you, Commissioner Ryan. My former boss, the late Commissioner Nick Fish, used to say that arts and culture make up the heart and soul of Portland, and I know a lot of us have heard him say that. And after serving for the last 15 months as Portland Arts and Culture Commissioner, I can tell you there are no truer words. Portlanders are known for our ability to earnestly engage in civic discourse through a diversity of viewpoints, perspectives on many topics, but we can all agree on one thing: we all love the elk. And I would like to thank the many Portlanders and arts lovers who reached out to my office to share how important it was that we return not just the elk, but the fountain that supported it as well. I also want to especially thank the excellent work of Randy Gregg and the Portland Parks Foundation board members and staff, which will work with a design firm to create a detailed assessment of the remaining fountain parts and whether and how we can ensure faithful restoration of the original fountain to its fullest extent, and to develop future scenarios for how a redesigned right-of-way can better accommodate the restored fountain base while addressing safety concerns for pedestrians, transit, and automobiles. And with this useful information, our talented Bureau staff will be able to fully enact the resolution we're voting on today. One of those staff, Jeff Hawthorne, our City Arts Program Manager, deserves particular gratitude today. From day one, and I literally mean since Jeff's first days in his role, he has been putting in the work to involve 6 different city bureaus overseen by all 4 commissioners and the mayor to find a sometimes windy path to ultimately getting us where we are today. And he has done so patiently and incredibly responsively to all our feedback and changes. Jeff, thank you for your diligent work to get the elk back and for helping us be responsive to Portlanders. For so many of us, this step today to affirm the return of the elk and fountain also affirms what we also know about Portland, that they are both strong and that they are both coming back built to last. So thanks again to our council colleagues, Chiefs Jillian Shoney, my chief Jillian Shoney, and Kelly Torres from Commissioner Ryan's office, all involved bureaus and the community for showing such love for our iconic Portland public art. And Jeff Hawthorne and Randy Gregg are also both available to answer any follow-up questions. Otherwise, Mayor, we turn it back over to you.
Very good. Thank you for that. This is also a resolution. Do we have any public testimony?
Yes, we have 8 people signed up.
Very good. 3 minutes each. Name for the record, please. And Keelan will call on you.
First up, we have John Zarnecki.
Is he virtual?
I think so. I think he's getting connected right now. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. Thanks for initiating and considering this resolution to restore and return the Thompson Elk Fountain to its original condition and location. My name's John Zarnecki. I'm an architect, downtown business owner, and past chair of the Landmarks Commission. I join others to strongly agree that the Thompson Elk Fountain must be repaired and restored and retain its rightful place on Southwest Main Street between Chapman and Lonsdale Squares, where it has stood since 1918. Intending to provide respite from and refreshment to the city and to commemorate elk herds of up to 200 members that once grazed nearby. Others have spoken well of the bronze statue and granite fountain pedestal, of its historic character and of its striking beauty. Understanding its continued significance as a public work of art brings genuine value to our city. It speaks. The Thompson Elk Fountain should symbolically and physically reinforce our continued relationship with the natural world of which we are a part. Thank you for this opportunity to speak and for your work on the city on our behalf by taking leadership roles in all our futures.
Next up, we have Walter Weiler. Yeah, I don't think he's joined us. Next, we have Brooke Best.
So, Commissioner Hardesty, this is the new norm.
I see. That's
Yeah.
what they know. Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I didn't get the memo, apparently.
I'm glad you guys did. That's great. Okay. My name is Brooke Best, and I'm speaking today on behalf of Bill Hawkins, who's worked tirelessly on this issue. Some of you know that Bill is a well-known architect with deep Portland roots. His work has focused on the preservation and documentation of historic buildings and landscapes. He's also an accomplished author, including a newly published history of Portland's park systems. Yes, this is a man who loves our city's parks. First off, thank you to all the city officials who took a step back and then listened to the public and then took a step forward with the proper stewardship of this iconic historic landmark. Thanks also to the group of dedicated citizens who reached out to the mayor, city commissioners, and bureaus to convey what's at stake and what's needed to restore this public monument. This is a statement in total support of the proposed resolution. It's not only feasible to restore the fountain, but imperative that the city restore it as a clear message of its commitment to revitalizing the downtown and bring a sense of hope and healing to its citizens. Portlanders have spoken, as seen in the thousands of emails that you all received. In response, Bill and Kit Hawkins have established a special 501c3 account, the Restore the Thompson Elk Fountain Fund, which hopes to inspire a broader citywide participation. This is offered up in addition to existing funding sources. Its aim is to support the reproduction of the fountain's missing granite parts, consistent with best practices for historic preservation and artwork conservation. Additionally, not only did they set up the fund, but Bill, along with TVA architects, prepared preliminary drawings on the fountain's components and consulted with 2 qualified stonemasons who confirmed this undertaking is completely feasible. Thank you, Bill and Kit, for your generous support and perseverance, and thank you, Mayor Weiler and City Council, for doing the right thing with this proposed resolution. The proud elk needs to stand tall on its original base in granite fountain, showing our city's resilience and leadership in preserving our great Portland city. Thank you.
Next up, we have Wendy Rom.
Oops. Oh, dear. Now that's a bad lot. Oh, dear. Oh. Oh, it isn't. I'm part of a club, so. I'm Wendy Rom. As Vice Chair of the Downtown Neighborhood Associations Board, or DNA, I'm happy to pass on the DNA's deep gratitude to you and your exceptional staff for listening to many concerned citizens and for this resolution. The DNA strongly recommends its approval. We know you are simultaneously dealing with many other important issues, so we doubly appreciate seeing this on today's agenda. Rescinding the demolition delay request now is essential so as to eliminate a false deadline, to allow time to get the restoration done, and to do that work while recognizing the monument's historic value. Restoring the historic icon, the beautiful bronze elk and its storied granite fountain base, and having it adorn the original 1900 site has become a metaphor for advancing downtown's recovery after 2 tempestuous years and a pandemic. Beauty is a necessity in our lives, and this monument is uplifting. Full recovery will come one step at a time, and this is a monumental stride in the right direction. The DNA also appreciates and endorses the call for a public process. Open and transparent processes with public input have better results. The DNA would like to be a partner in the process and could easily suggest a qualified person to serve on the committee if council agrees. This monument is in the DNA's geographic area, so of course has strong DNA support. To ensure meaningful public involvement, we ask that there be no requirement of a non-disclosure agreement, which is counter to a transparent public process. Currently, a non-disclosure agreement is being required to serve on this committee. This does not seem democratic to us. The DNA thanks each of you for your tireless work that makes Portland a great place to live. Thank you all.
Next up, we have Aubrey Russell.
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Can anyone? All right, thank you. I want primarily just to thank you for this resolution. I want to thank all the commissioners and you, Mr. Mayor. I also want to acknowledge Bill Hawkins. Bill is an architect and a historic preservation advocate. Bill's good faith efforts to direct the city towards restoration of the fountain were rejected by the director of the Portland Parks Foundation as early as July of August 2020, and were met by complete email silence by the City Arts Program Manager for many months prior to the city's surprise announcement of demolition delay earlier this year. Bill's support for restoration has been principled and it has been persistent. So I want to thank Bill as well. This resolution is great. Thank you again. It sets a new tone. It's a requirement to restore the fountain to its original state and its original location. I want to point out, though, that those same people who ignored Bill Hawkins previously and who played prominent roles in the city's effort to remove the Thompson fountain, that those same people are now charged with restoration of the fountain. So I hope that this city council will remain vigilant to ensure that the resolution's inclusion of the word feasible is not taken by these former proponents for removing the fountain as a way to raise objections to the complete restoration of the fountain. The director of the Portland Parks Foundation will now participate in a study for the fountain's restoration. The public, though, will be very interested, and it should be a public process. The foundation's project advisory committee is a private committee. The foundation's idea that there would be a non-disclosure agreement is a very bad idea. What's needed now is transparency, especially after the repeated false and misleading statements on the part of the city over the last number of months. A non-disclosure agreement would encourage members of that committee, I feel, to push their own objectives, not the ones that are set out so clearly in your very good resolution. So I want to, again, thank you for this resolution. And I want to, again, urge that you keep an eye on this moving forward. Again, thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members, and that's all I have.
Next up, we have Terry Parker.
Good morning, Terry Parker. I like it when there's two items that I want to testify at the same meeting. I guess I'll just be tooting my own horn today. Thank you so much for doing this as a lifelong Portlander. I fully support a complete restoration of the Thompson Elk Fountain, the eastern granite base, and the water spouting fountain right down to the rocks in the street at the edges of the fountain base, which are still out there on the street. Returning it to its original location on Southwest Main between Chapman and Loungedale Square. Hopefully those who vandalized this historic treasure were charged and convicted of the crime with consequences including some form of payment and punishment. Given the defunding and reforming of law enforcement movements where the police are disrespected and criminals have the upper hand, it's doubtful those who did the damage were actually held accountable. Keeping the water running might be a good form of protection in the future. It has been said art is in the eye of the beholder. While the Thompson Elk is one of Portland's most endeared historic art sculptures, the job of repairing other city treasures damaged during the summer of 2020 is not complete. Although historic statues are not appreciated by everybody. They also need to be restored, released from behind bars, and returned to outdoor places where they can be enjoyed by the people that appreciate them. Now I'm going to skip over some of what I wrote. I've passed a thing to the clerk so you can read it in privacy. In closing, if the rest of the locked up historical treasures, statues, I'm sorry, I'm really fumbling today, are not returned to public view, then all public art needs to have a review for the majority of acceptance. And the arts tax must either be eliminated or strictly voluntary. Thank you. Again, thank you for restoring this treasure that I have appreciated throughout my lifetime.
Thank you. Thanks, Terry.
Next up, we have Randy Gregg.
Greetings, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person or even by video. My camera seems to be broken. So I'm Randy Gregg, Executive Director of the Portland Parks Foundation. Our motto is "We help people help parks." And in this case, we want to help the Thompson Elk Fountain return. We have been in conversation with the bureaus and with Jeff Hawthorne for months as various options for the elk's future have been pondered. And our mission all along was to add value to whatever decision the city made. We made no public or private stance against full restoration of the fountain. And we're elated that the resolution for full restoration is before you. And in fact, even before this resolution emerged, our board voted unanimously to commission the feasibility study for full restoration. And we were in the process of, we released an RFQ and we're putting together a project advisory committee as this next step in the fountain's future unfolded. So our RFQ closed, and we have a wonderful group. We will be doing interviews next week. And because there seem to be so many voices of dissent as to whether the foundation did actually support full restoration, we opted to set up a project advisory committee to oversee our work. This committee is diverse in age, race, and background. We're all deeply committed. I shouldn't say we, they are all deeply committed to full restoration. As a group, we have one of the most experienced preservation consultants in the country, a former Portland Landmarks Commissioner, a former supervisor for 15 years of the Portland Historic Landmarks Commission, a former director of transportation planning for PBOT, the chair of the Historic Cemeteries Commission, and also Andre Lightsey Walker, who you heard from earlier in the day. Despite my own considerable resume in preservation advocacy and programming and preservation work, I personally will only be facilitating. The committee will guide the work. There is no, I think, existing nonprofit. I didn't know about Mr. Hawkins' efforts is better positioned to do this feasibility study. The situation is really quite similar to our work on the Barbara Walker Crossing. Multiple bureaus who agreed that there was a necessity for a crossing over Burnside to connect the Wildwood Trail, but none of them really equipped to take it forward. And so we jumped in and not only commissioned the design, but ultimately oversaw the work. And so it's very similar situation. This is a feasibility study that we want to give the city, and our goal is absolute full restoration and to make the site better, make it improve the surrounds so that it'll be safer and more beautiful. So thank you.
Next up, we have John Tess.
Hello. Good morning, Mr. Mayor, council members. My name is John Tess. I'm founder of Heritage Consulting Group. It's a company I founded 40 years ago in Portland and grew it to be a national leader in historic preservation consulting. over the years, I've been able to work on a lot of really nice projects around the country in over 45 states, but Portland is always, dear to me. And I've been able to work with people like Bill Nato, Bill Roberts, Pete Mark, Doug Goodman, and Bob Dant, just to name a few. So I've been working on a lot of projects throughout this area, and it's been very exciting. Today, I really want to commend you on adopting this resolution to restore the Thompson Fountain in an original location. I think Randy said, putting it in the original location is important, and I truly believe that is, that's what this project should all be about. I also want to especially thank Commissioners Ryan and Rubio for taking the initiative here and to get this thing out here and make this thing happen. I was happy to see that people seem to have come to their senses over this matter. Hopefully, as Bill Nader would say, common sense will prevail through the process. To me, it's a pretty simple issue. We have an important landmark, a piece of art that has been damaged, and we need to restore it. Accomplishing this goal should not be that complicated, given the importance of the fountain to the city, especially in these trying times, how it would actually, I think, really bring people together. That's what we need to do, given everything that's happened. And it would make a statement too to what happened downtown. We would rebuild. Portland in better times adopted the motto as the city that works. Today, many people probably question that a little bit and whether or not we're living up to that motto. But I truly believe if this project is done correctly, it will help restore and reinforce Portland as the city that works. That said, I just want to make a couple comments. First, I think the project should stay focused on the fountain and its restoration, not get bogged down in bureaucracy. Different departments and agencies of the city need to coordinate and they need to work together. I mean, we've heard a lot about transportation, everything else that was happening, but we really need to coordinate. We can't be at odds with what we're trying to accomplish here, and that'll help facilitate the process. Second, the fountain, while addressing safety concerns, street design should not hold up the funding of the project. While the street design does come into play here, we need to remember that the city has worked for over 120 years, with the fountain there. And if we take that into consideration, we should also take into consideration the two parks. I'm almost done. I think also, just on a side note, the city should, I think, review the ability of public entities to make application for a historic demo delay. I think that just to look at it and see if that really makes sense. Lastly, I think the city should fund this immediately. To me, it would be somewhat embarrassing if we have to look to other funds in order to put this thing together. The city seems to have the funds now, and we could do this thing and get it rolling. In closing, I've been appointed to the Portland Parks Foundation Committee on the fountain, and I look forward to its restoration. And thank you so much for everything that you've done in this. I think it really hits the heart of the city and the people that live here. Thank you very much.
And that completes testimony.
All right, thank you, everybody who testified. That was great. Colleagues, any further discussion on this resolution? Seeing none, Keelan, please call the roll.
Ryan.
Gotta put these on for this. It's hard to keep it on, isn't it? Okay.
I was going to say something.
What's that?
I said I was going to say something.
You want to wear this after me, don't you? Okay. Colleagues, I want to start off by thanking the folks who testified before us today. This truly feels like the second week of school to actually see people live and actually have civic discourse on issues in live, and we actually laugh together. This is also part of the restoration of Portland. I'm honored to be here before all of you today supporting a resolution to return the Thompson Elk Fountain, which I truly believe is a part of the healing of downtown and our entire city. I'm excited to vote in support of this resolution and encourage my colleagues to do the same. I vote aye.
Hardesty.
Aye.
Maps.
I'd like to thank Commissioner Ryan and Rubio for bringing this ordinance forward. I support bringing the Elk Fountain back to its original location and back to its original form with one caveat. Historically, fresh drinking water has flowed through the fountain. when the fountain is restored, I sure hope it's updated so that recycled water runs through the fountain. I believe some history would be helpful here. The Elk Fountain was dedicated on July 4, 1900. The driving force behind the creation of the fountain was David P. Thompson, who had been mayor of Portland from 1879 to 1882. Thompson was an animal lover. He was the original founding director of the Oregon Humane Society. And back in the late 1800s, Thompson was deeply concerned about the lack of places in Portland to water your horse. At that time, if you wanted to feed your horse water, you basically had three choices. You could use the river, you could go over to Skidmore Fountain, or you could go up to Forest Park. Today, most Portlanders think of the Elk Fountain as being a statue, but the original and structural function of the Elk Fountain was to serve as a giant drinking fountain for horses. Friends, sadly, we are the last generation of Portlanders to remember a time when horses roamed our streets. But today there are no horses on our streets, and yet every year, the city of Portland runs nearly 7 million gallons of fresh, drinkable water through the Elk Fountain, and then that water goes directly into the sewer. That is enough to supply 146 single-family homes with fresh drinking water for a year. The original design of the Elk statue helped solve a problem Portlanders faced in the late 1800s, and that problem was, how do you get water to your horse? But today, that design is environmentally and economically irresponsible. For these reasons and more, I support returning the Elk statue to its original location, and I support returning the statue to its original form. However, we should switch the fountain from fresh water to recirculated water. That being said, I vote aye.
Rubio.
Thank you to everyone who took the time to testify today and for your advocacy. It's a really wonderful moment today. And I also want to reiterate that our council is here 100% aligned in restoring the Elkin Fountain. And I hear the concerns and want to dispel any notions or doubts about the city's intent to do anything otherwise, nor was there or any interest in moving it. We're all proud of this iconic elk and fountain, and we're eager for its return. And I also want to, again, thank my co-sponsor, Commissioner Ryan, and his team, my staff, again, the great work of Jeff Hawthorne and Parks Foundation to make sure that we came together to get this on the right track. I'm also grateful to hear about Mr. Hawkins' work as well, and I look forward to all of us coming together to celebrate once the Elkin Fountain are restored and back in place. And also, thank you to Portlanders who have contacted our offices and made your voices heard, and for your love of the iconic elk and fountain. And now we will all enjoy it for generations to come. I'm very happy to vote aye.
Weiler.
I would like to thank my colleagues, Commissioner Rubio and Commissioner Ryan, for bringing this forward and for taking the time to meet with concerned citizens in our community who felt very strongly about this, some of whom are present today, both in person or virtually, all wearing antlers. That's the important thing. This has been a real tough one for me, and I don't mean in terms of the decision making. Of course we should return the Thompson Elk statue to its original location, and of course it should have a fountain associated with it. The anguish for me as somebody who was born and raised here was to see it blown apart, burned, desecrated, graffitied, and then to add insult to injury, have somebody passed out in the middle of it still the next morning when the media came to photograph it. And it showed utter disrespect for the history of the city. It showed disrespect for the community. It showed disrespect for all of us who appreciate the good in this city. And bringing the statue back is more than just a statement of aesthetics, and it's more than a statement, to me at least, about the recovery of this city. It's a statement that people who break the law and break things do not get the last word in our city. We do. We, the people of this city, get the final word, and it's coming back. And I would like to also support this. Somebody mentioned the Restore Thompson Elk Fund, and I hope whoever is in charge of that, will you please get me the information, send it to my office, throw the card at me. I would be honored to support your Restore the Thompson Elk Fund, and I hope other people will join me in doing that as well. You know, this to me is an important issue. It's not just about a fountain. It's really about us as a community. So thank you all for bringing it forward. I vote aye. The resolution is adopted. Thank you, colleagues, for bringing it forward. Next item. Oh, you know what? Break. Thank you. I'm so glad I said. We'll take about a 5 to 7-ish minute break. All of us need a break, and I know our closed caption people's hands are probably numb at this point. So we are in recess for 5 to 7 minutes.
Recording in progress.
Accept bid of Kodiak Pacific Construction Co. for Errol Heights Street and Storm Drainage Improvements Project for $5,991,000.
Colleagues, this report authorizes construction for the Errol Heights Street and Storm Drainage Improvement Project. This project will pave streets and driveway connections. It'll add sidewalks as well as street lights and provide stormwater management systems to the area. Chief Procurement Officer Biko Taylor is here to give us the details. Good morning, Biko. Biko, are you unmuted?
Mayor, we may be having some technical difficulties. Open Signal, are you able to unmute?
I see him on. He's just not unmuted. Well, let's do this. Let's move, let's go, we'll bypass this one and the next one, which are both Director Taylor, and we'll go to 382, please.
I think we may be back on.
Oh, wait.
Director Taylor, can you hear us?
I can hear you now. I was
there you
wondering
are.
what was going.
All right, good. We just had a small technical glitch. We're doing item number 380.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler. Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Biko Taylor, the Chief Procurement Officer. On April 21st, 2021, City Council approved ordinance number 190368. Forgive me, I think I'm on the wrong one. I'll double back on the next. Okay. On February 23rd, 2022, City Council approved ordinance 190716 for procurement services to competitively bid the Errol Heights Street and Storm Drainage Improvement Project. Bids were opened on April 4th, 2022, and we received 4 bids. The lowest responsible bid came from Kodiak Pacific Construction Company. Thus, it is recommended that their bid be accepted at the estimated bid amount of $5,991,000, which is 9% below the engineer's estimate. The city's equity and contracting aspirational goal for this project is 20% of the hard construction costs for subcontractor and supplier utilization of firms certified by the state's Certification Office for Business Inclusion and Diversity, or COBID. Kodiak Pacific Construction Company has committed to contracting 23.49% to COBID certified firms. Of those firms, 2 of those are African American, one an African American male and the other an African American female. Faison Construction was awarded a subcontract portion for $1.176 million. The total COBID certification portion of this contract, again, is 23.49% at $1.40 million. Kodak Pacific Construction Company will self-perform 73.1% of the work on this project. That concludes my talking points on this item. Any questions?
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Director Taylor. Let me just say how pleased I am to see a significant subcontract going to a minority-owned firm. I just wanted to actually point that out. You know I give you heck every time you bring me one that looks bad, and wanted to acknowledge that this is actually a huge improvement from what we've seen in my 3 years here on the council, so good work.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty.
Keelan, do we have any public testimony on this report?
No one signed up.
I'll entertain a motion.
I move we accept the report as presented.
Commissioner Hardesty moves.
Second.
Commissioner Ryan seconds. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Ryan?
Thank you, Director Taylor, and thank you for the clarity with all of your data. It was so crisp and clear. I vote aye.
Hardesty?
Aye.
Maps,
Aye.
Rubio,
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. The report is accepted. Item 381, please, Keelan.
Authorize price agreements for urgent repair of sewer and stormwater systems to Sandbar Construction LLC, Interlochen Inc., Titan Utilities LLC, and Iron Horse Excavation LLC, DBA Oxbow Construction, for $550,000.
The Bureau of Environmental Services needs to be able to repair, stabilize, and remediate sewer and stormwater assets to protect the public as well as environmental health and safety. This report authorizes 4 open contracts at set bid prices to perform urgent work on an as-needed basis. Biko Taylor is here to talk about this one as well. Director Taylor.
Thank you, Mayor Wheeler. On April 21st, 2021, City Council approved Ordinance 190368 for this project. The original engineer's estimate for this project was $2.2 million. Procurement Services issued an invitation to bid to the prime contractor development program participants on February 4th, 2022. The bids were due on February 24th, 2022, and we received 4 bids. BES has recommended we award the price agreements to Sandbar Construction LLC, Interlaken Incorporated, Titan Utilities LLC, and Iron Horse Excavation LLC, doing business as Oxbow Construction. The estimated annual construction cost based on bids received is $2.2 million. The city's equity and contracting aspirational goal for this project is 20% of the hard construction costs for subcontractor and supplier utilization of firms certified by the State Certification Office for Business Inclusion and Diversity, or COBID. That statute applies to this project. Work performed under these price agreements will be authorized via written task orders. So as of today, we don't have a definite demand or a definite quantity of work for each of these awarded bidders, but an aspirational goal of 20% will be used to hold these vendors accountable. Our team will make sure that we work with Sandbar, Interlaken, Titan, and Iron Horse to achieve the city's equity and contracting aspirational goal. That concludes my points on this item. Any questions?
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Director Taylor. I asked you if you could give me a back-of-the-napkin analysis of how many dollars these particular construction companies have received over the last 5 years and what their minority utilization rate has been in that time period. Were you able to pull that together?
Yes, but I would like to speak with you private on those matters. I do have data. I haven't had an opportunity to look at the data and review it, as I just received it moments prior to our session. And so I'll take responsibility for not having reviewed that by the time we did CPO talking points. But I would like to speak with you and present that information to you as your schedule permits.
I look forward to having that conversation. And Mayor and council members, the reason I ask is because these particular companies normally come back with a subcontract of $14,000 to minority-owned firms, and they have a history of doing that. So I'm not comfortable putting $2.2 million aside and trusting that they will reach our aspirational goals. So I just wanted to put that on the record, and I was hoping that I would have that information. In my 3 years here, I know Interlaken has been emerging for 18 years. They started in 2004. I think they should have emerged by now. If I look at Iron Horse, they started in 2005. And I am concerned we've allowed contractors to continue to not reach our goals, and yet they continue to get contracts from the city of Portland. So if this is voted on today, I will be a no vote because I cannot in good conscience continue to support firms who actually take advantage of our aspirational goals. So that's where I am.
Very good. Any other questions? Keelan, do we have public testimony on this item?
No one signed up.
This is a report. I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we accept the report.
I will second the report. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Ryan,
Aye.
Hardesty,
No.
Maps,
Aye.
Rubio.
I remain concerned, and this is new information to me. So I'm very eager also to hear from Biko Taylor following this topic. But in the absence of that, I want to keep work moving forward. So I will vote aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. The report is accepted. Next item, 382, please. This is a non-emergency ordinance.
Amend the FY 2021-22 revised budget for Public Safety Support Specialist Program expansion.
Colleagues, I'll turn this over to Mike Myers, who, as you know, is the Community Safety Transition Director, to introduce the ordinance. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, council members. For the record, my name is Mike Myers. I'm the Community Safety Transition Director for the City of Portland. With me today is Deputy Chief Mike Frome from the Portland Police Bureau and Business Services Manager Ken Lee. The PS3 program received council approval and funding for 12 public safety support specialist PS3s in 2017 and received stakeholder approval in 2018. The first 9 PS3s were hired in June of 2019 and began taking calls in November of 2019. Since its inception, the PS3 program has adhered to its original intent and purpose. The redistribution of workload to PS3s, considering the current critical staffing shortage of police officers, has begun to allow patrol officers to focus on responding to higher priority calls for service. Having PS3s handle more lower priority calls for service and being more involved in community engagement opportunities can improve citizen satisfaction regarding response times and the overall ability of officers to respond to calls. We continue to propose that PS3s can take a large amount of low priority calls that would typically be handled by patrol officers. Between January 2020 and October 2021, PS3s have taken the majority, 66%, of all vehicles stolen cold calls. The top 4 call types taken by PS3s, vehicles stolen cold, theft cold, vehicle recovered, and property lost, found, and recovered, account for 74% of PS3 eligible call load. All concern stolen or recovered property and vehicles. When not actively taking calls, PS3s spend time writing reports, entering property into a property collection facility, and taking calls by phone as needed. They frequently assist officers at traffic crash scenes or other locations where blocking traffic is needed, or by waiting with vehicles for the arrival of a tow truck. PS3s also actively self-initiate calls for service, such as locating and recovering unreported and unoccupied stolen vehicles. The fiscal year 2021-22 adopted budget was amended by council to reduce the police bureau's budget by $988,032 in relation to 12 full-time equivalent public safety support specialist positions. Council had those funds held in contingency with the bureau's budget, provided that PPB has the public safety support specialist program evaluated for efficacy. The Portland Police Bureau performed an internal evaluation of the program, which resulted in a draft study. PPB then requested proposals from outside individuals, firms, teams, or consultants who could demonstrate their experience in developing and completing a peer review of the PS3 study. A vendor was selected and provided the evaluation, which focused on the study's methodologies, statistical tests, interpretation of data, and outcomes. PPB currently has 20 active PS3s, in the process of hiring 2 more for a total of 22 PS3s. Portland Police Bureau also is asking for 12 PS3 positions in contingency. That's why we're here today at this May 11th council meeting. The mayor's proposed budget are asking for 8 ongoing PS3s plus additional, proposed budget of 8 ongoing PS3s plus an additional 28 limited term PS3s will bring the total number to 70 PS3s. This legislation was created to formally submit the evaluation to council, fulfill the criteria set forth in the adopted budget amendment, and request the release of the contingent funds back to the Portland Police Bureau budget in order to reestablish the 12 FTE PS3 staff positions affected by the amendment. This concludes my testimony.
Colleagues, any questions at this particular juncture? Keelan, do we have Commissioner Hardesty?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Director Myers. Good to have you here at City Hall today. You may know that there is a budget note pending in the mayor's proposed budget around actually doing a real independent evaluation of the PS3 program. And so I just wanted that to be on the public record. As of yet, we've not received an independent analysis of whether or not the PS3 program is working as intended. So I did not want to leave my colleagues assuming that we have an evaluation. We do not have an independent evaluation. Is that accurate?
We have a peer review of the study that was done by Portland Police Bureau. I think an independent, so I believe your comments are true. We have, this would allow us to do an independent study outside of that with a different vendor.
So I am concerned that we're presenting this as if we have completed the task, and that was what the budget note was in last year's budget. So I'm just a bit confused about why we would be affirming that we've actually completed that task, because we have not. What was done was the person who runs the PS3 program put a report together, and then you contracted with someone to review that report. But as you know, when we did Portland Street Response, we had an independent auditor actually to audit the program, right? Because if I had told you how great and wonderful Portland Street Response was, you probably would not have taken my word for it. And so for me, it's really important that we have a standard of audits, and audits are all conducted in some same kind of way. So I'm a little confused by this actual ordinance coming to council today when we have, I would be willing to do this after we've actually agreed to the mayor's budget, where we are going to do a truly independent audit. It just seems a bit premature to do this at this moment.
Any further discussion? Do we have public, Commissioner Maps, I apologize.
We can, if we have public testimony, we can get that on the table.
Do we have public testimony?
We have one person signed up,
All right, why don't we go ahead and hear from them, and then to Commissioner Maps.
Dan Handelman.
Good afternoon, Mayor and City Council. This is Dan Handelman. I use he, him pronouns. I'm with the group Portland Cop Watch. And we testified about the PSSS program quite a few times. I just want to kind of reiterate some of the things we're saying. And I do support what Commissioner Hardesty is saying about having an independent review before expanding it too far. That there are way too limited tasks that are given to these mostly unarmed officers. Well, I shouldn't say officers, these specialists that could be taken off the hands of the police. That institutionally speaking, it doesn't make sense to have them be part of the police bureau, that the way that PSR is set up, Portland Street Response, to be a separate entity that is in touch with the bureau and has dispatch protocols for it and make sure that there's no overlap and confusion, that could be also applied to them. And so related to that is that they should never have been allowed to enter into the collective bargaining unit with the armed officers who have a very different set of interests than these unarmed or mostly unarmed specialists. For the record, they have they carry pepper spray with them. And so that leads to another question, which is if there's a complaint about them because they are called specialists and they're not sworn officers and therefore they're not under the purview of the independent police review, which we'll be discussing later, how does a person file a complaint against them, especially if they end up using force? And do they have any kind of state certification that can be revoked in the same way that officers have Department of Public Safety standards and training numbers and state review about their behavior? So I've never really understood that of the PSSS program. How do you file complaints against these the specialists if you have one? And we hope that the independent study will encourage expanding this program in the same way that the PSU study of PSR encouraged expanding of that program. But maybe they can also look at these institutional issues that I've raised with you today, whether or not they should be part of the police bureau, whether or not they should be with the police association. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dan. And just to reiterate, we are management, so we cannot tell our employees who they can or who they cannot organize with. That is up to the employees. Commissioner Maps.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is for staff. I don't know if it's most appropriate for Director Myers or Chief Frome. Can someone just remind council what the original Bureau-led evaluation found about the efficacy of the PS3 program?
Chief Fromm, can you comment on the study that was originally done by PPB and the reason we went for peer review?
Yeah, briefly, the review that was initially done by the Portland Police Bureau, we had a lieutenant who was assigned to the chief's office as one of the executive assistants, basically worked with our strategic services division to pull numbers. And the real goal was to find out how many calls for service are they taking, what percentage of calls are they starting to show up as being very useful with. And as Director Meyer said, we learned that they were taking a large number of stolen car reports, recovering a lot of stolen cars, theft reports. And each and every one of these calls meant that a police officer did not have to go and take it. So the summary of our initial study was, yes, they're out there, they're taking calls. They appear to be very efficient at it. They take a little bit more time per call than a typical police officer would, but they are writing a lot more police reports because almost all of the calls that they take result in like the recovery of property or a person making a complaint. So that was what the initial one was. After the desire for some external eyes were made very clear to us, I reached out to 2 different people at Portland State asking if they would have the time and the ability to do the kind of review that is anticipated in the future. They did not have time. That was something that we could not do. And at that point, we worked with Director Myers and we went for the outside peer review because under our time frame that we were looking at, it was going to be much easier to get the peer review done than it was to actually have someone start an entire new one.
Thank you. And I forget the legislative history here. Did this council vote and direct the Bureau to go out and seek an evaluation of the evaluation? How did that decision come about?
I believe it was simply expressed to us that this was something that we should do.
It was a budget note in the last budget process, Commissioner Mapps, that directed an independent evaluation be done.
Okay, and what did this evaluation of the evaluation find?
In a nutshell, it recommended that the PS3 program could be expanded. They were showing that they were being efficient in taking calls, and it had a few suggestions on hours of operation and additional expansion of responsibilities.
Okay. And I guess later on today, one of the proposals on the table will be to do yet another evaluation, the 3rd one, I believe, of this. Is that correct? Is that what's happening here today? I'll take that to Mike.
Yeah, Commissioner, I think what we're going to see over time, I mean, let's be frank on the subject that I think we all agree there is an interest amongst all of us to look at the total call volume of 911 call volume that goes to Portland Police Bureau to armed officers today and do a pretty deep dive on what can be reallocated to unarmed officers. And I think that's going to take years for us to evaluate. You know, there's a lot of we are changing and reforming the way we are doing 911 calls with Portland Police Bureau. And this is happening across the country. We're not the only ones. So this original study that was done by Chief Fromm and his team at the Strategic Services Division identified some areas where we could pull calls off and reroute them to unarmed officers. And it has reduced call volume on unarmed officers. And the study supports that, and it is working. There is a lot of room to go. We have a lot more call volume that we believe can be moved, but there's a lot of steps in between that. We simply can't reallocate work without working with labor representatives. Everyone here that's suggesting further studies is correct. We need to evaluate exactly what we're moving. These are critical calls. Bad things can happen if we move the wrong call to the wrong people. So I suggest we continue to study it. I think where we're at today, we have 90 officers or 90 specialists ready to be hired. I mean, we've been recruited. We have a good applicant pool. Those are the best numbers we've seen in a long time. We have 70 officer specialists right now with an opportunity to hire if you move the 12 over, and we do the mayor's proposed. That gets us a certain distance. And there are good questions here today, even from the testimony, like how do we handle complaints? We still have a long way to go. If we moved on this today, we still have to post for the hire. We have to interview. get people hired. It takes, correct me if I'm wrong, Chief Rome, 12 months minimum to get them through schooling at DPSST. We're still looking at a long way before we get an officer or a specialist out on the street to do work. So all of this is going to happen over the next 2 or 3 years. I'm asking you today, move the contingency fund over PPB. Let's get the 70 hired. In 12 to so many months down, a few months down the road, we will have done some more work. I'm trying to pace it out so that I believe we will be moving calls from unarmed officers or from armed officers to unarmed officers. It's about pacing this out.
Thank you, Director Myers. And just one last question, and I'll have the director, or I'll give the director and the chief an opportunity to respond if you have a response. Are either of you aware of any factual errors or methodological errors in the original evaluation or the evaluation of the evaluation which you think this council should be aware of today?
Chief Fromm, you probably know the studies the best. You've reviewed them yourself. I've read both studies, both the study and the peer review. I took them for face value. They appeared to have a very supportive narrative, but I did not peer review it myself. So I can't speak to me doing any verification of their work. I simply read the report and made the conclusion based on what the conclusions were on the report. Chief Fromm, I would hate to ask you to opine on this, but did you do any deep digging and any verification of your study of the Strategic Services Division or the peer review?
Chief, maybe I'll just put it. Maybe just let me put this into plain language for people watching at home. Did you come across or notice any factual errors in the original report, or any methodological concerns in the original report, or any factual errors or methodological errors in the evaluation of the original report? Are there any red flags here in the data that we have before us today that we should be concerned about?
Commissioner, when I reviewed the initial study and then the peer review, nothing leaped out at me with a giant red flag.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor, if I may.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to again set the record straight. The gentleman who runs the PS3 program did the original study. That's like me asking Robin to give us a report on whether Portland Street response was working. And I went right to Deputy Chief Fromm and said, Chief Fromm, this is just not acceptable. He accepted that. He tried to get PSU or other evaluators to do a real evaluation. He did not have time, so they did this modified peer review. But what's flawed about a peer review is you only are reviewing the data in front of you. You have no way to determine whether or not the data you have in front of you is factual. And again, this is not like picking out the police bureau to do something significant, but when we ask for an independent third-party audit, I do not expect a Portland police officer to put it together and tell me what a great job they did, right? What I expect is to have some outsider come in and say, this is what we looked at, this is what we learned, et cetera, right? So what you're calling audit is actually a report that was done by the lieutenant who actually runs the program. And again, if we're actually building a new system, we should be building a system based on facts, not based on what people think is happening with a program.
Commissioner Hardesty, may I have a follow-up question? So in your review of the report that came from the Police Bureau, did you want to point us towards any factual errors or methodological concerns that are contained in that report, other than concern about the integrity of the people who actually did the report?
Well, I don't have any concern about the integrity of the people. The job that was given was you tell us whether or not it's working. Most independent audits, and I read every audit that the auditor's office puts out, most audits don't tell you what a great job people are doing, right? And yes, this is wonderful, right? That is an advocacy position, and I saw that paper as an advocacy position paper as compared to a third-party, independently researched report. So again, we can't have one standard for one bureau and have a different standard for other bureaus. That is my point, and that is what I've been pushing for about a year and a half now.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. One more
You're welcome.
question. I understand and respect your initial skepticism of the initial report put out by the Portland Police Bureau. And so we did an outside evaluation of the report put forward by the Police Bureau. As in my reading of the evaluation, they identified no methodological concerns and no factual concerns. So do you have any specific concerns about the evaluation of the evaluation, other than the evaluation of the evaluation did not find any problems with the original report?
So again, it was a peer review. It was not an evaluation. It was a peer review of a document written by the gentleman who runs the PS3 program. And so the peer review looked at the documents. Did the numbers add up? Is this consistent with protocol, right? But we missed a fundamental question, which is having an independent source actually look at the raw data and determine, did we actually measure the right thing, right? Are we in fact having a difference on who responds to those 911 calls, right? Are they responding to the right thing? The request that is in the mayor's proposed budget will actually will allow them to do to think about how to expand PS3 in an intentional way, right? What other service calls could they go on, right? So again, my goal is not to interrupt anybody's flow, but we as a council must have a standard when we say there's an audit that we have requested, and it was requested by the entire city council as a budget note. And again, when I look at something, again, it's like I said, if I had wrote a report on Portland Street response, would you have thought it was as great as it was? I would say no, because I wouldn't have trusted it because I did it. I have a vested interest in the outcome. And so that is my concern, that we continue to accept a peer review document as if it's an audit, and it's not an audit. And we need an audit before we actually expand this program citywide, in my view, and that was the view of the last council.
Commissioner Hardesty, thank you for your clarification.
You're very welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you both, Director Myers.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. And maybe I think maybe this is just a miscommunication on what was actually in the budget note and what was inferred. And we have to be very clear on what we're asking for. I have the business services manager. Can you read the portion around the budget, what we were asked to do? And I think we need to say this too, while Ken's prepping his notes. I want to make sure, what we were supposed to do and what we did and what maybe it was inferred. It sounds like there's a budget note coming up that's going to propose an independent review, which I think we should support and encourage and embrace. We should be looking at every step of the way how we are rolling out PS3s over time. And Commissioner Hardesty, I hear you loud and clear, and we're not done. The PS3s we're on the leading edge of this. So we have a long way to go. They're doing great work right now. I think we all agree they can do much, much more later. We have a long way to go. So Ken Lee is the business services manager for the community safety division. Ken, are you able to kind of read what the direction is that we received in the budget note?
Yes, Ken Lee, community safety division, business services manager. Thank you for that. The budget note that I have in front of me from the fiscal year 21-22 adopted budget, it's motion to retain resources for public safety support specialists in contingency pending evaluation. The note reads, reduce the police bureau's personal services budget by $988,032 and offset by increasing contingency in the police bureau by $988,032. By retaining these resources in contingency, Council is requiring that the police bureau delay hiring 12 of the 22 additional authorized public safety support specialists until a program evaluation is performed. The resources to hire these 12 FTE are retained in the police bureau budget, but will require further council action before being spent. And that is the extent of the note.
Thank you, Ken. So I think, where the miscommunication is here, I believe, and Chief Rome, you can, step in and correct me. I believe that you took that budget note as a request to perform an evaluation and took those steps to do that with your strategic services division. We had some interest in looking at it further after it was done to make sure that we did it correctly and it was supported or not supported, and that's what we did the peer review. And I think there's some on the council that believe that this should have been done by a third party, and I don't deny, I understand that interest. So I think in the future, as we design these budget notes and we're requesting reviews, we be very specific about what we want, if it's a third party review or not. Commissioner Hardesty, I feel like we did what we were asked to do. And I understand that you feel differently, but we did that work. And I'm encouraged by the fact that we do have independent reviews coming up. I think that is a good step for us because this is a lot of money and a major decision. But today we are asking for the 12 to be released. I would encourage council to move forward. We have the recruits and the applicants here ready to go. And Commissioner Hardesty, we have a long way to go on this. There's a lot of work ahead of us.
Thank you, Director Myers. And let me say, the devil's always in the details, isn't it? And I will let you know that I did talk to Chief Lavelle yesterday, I believe, and he has committed to the third-party audit that is being proposed in the mayor's proposed budget. So based on the fact of this very lively conversation that we've had here today, I think authorizing the transfer of those 12 positions I am comfortable with, but I will be working very closely with you to make sure that when we go out and ask for an audit, that we all are using the same terminology so that we are getting the data that will inform us as we move forward. So I appreciate all your work on this. I know I've spent a lot of time talking to Chief Foam about this, gave him some ideas of folks that we could talk to. So I am comfortable that we're putting the pieces in place, this budget process that will inform how we move forward with this program. So appreciate that. Thank you.
Any further discussion on this particular item? Seeing none, this is a first reading of a non-emergency ordinance. I look forward, Director Myers, to supporting this when it comes back to a second reading. It is moved to second reading. Next item is a second reading, item 383.
Extend contract with Cascadia Behavioral Health Care, Inc. to December 31st, 2022, and increase the not-to-exceed amount to $3,790,115 for mental health clinician services.
Colleagues, this is a second reading. We've already heard a presentation and taken public testimony. Is there any further discussion on this item? Seeing none, Keelan, please call the roll.
Ryan.
Aye.
Hardesty.
Aye.
Maps.
Aye.
Rubio.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Supporting community members in mental health and behavioral crises is a critical aspect of community safety. We're all aware of that. I appreciate the work that the Behavioral Health Unit, BHU, does alongside other community safety partners like the Portland Street Response. This contract extension allows the BHU to continue to deliver important services to the community while working to hire clinicians as city employees. I want to thank the BHU for recognizing an opportunity to advance equity amongst those who we call upon to respond to people in crisis. As city employees, clinicians can be assured consistency and fairness in this important and challenging work that they do. I vote aye, and the ordinance is adopted. Next item, please, is, here it is. 384. Thank you.
Declare property located at 9442 Northeast 13th Avenue as surplus real property and authorize the Director of the Bureau of Environmental Services to dispose of the property by public sale.
First reading of a non-emergency ordinance. Commissioner Maps.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Colleagues, this ordinance authorizes the Bureau of Environmental Services to sell a property located at 9442 Northeast 13th Avenue. We're talking about a single-family home in the Flyway Wetlands Natural Area, which is located in the Columbia Slough watershed. Environmental Services acquired this property in 2000. 2015 when the Bureau purchased a little more than 4 acres of land in the Columbia Slough with the intent of protecting and restoring those wetlands. This purchase included a single-family home on a 3.34 acre lot. Environmental Services interests here are in the wetlands that surround this house. The Bureau itself has no interest in the house. That's why Environmental Services would like to dispose of this property. There is something else you should know about this house. Environmental Services bought, or after Environmental Services bought this property, a pipe in the house burst, flooding the home and causing extensive damage. Today, the house is uninhabitable and unfixable due to black mold. The property has gone through the city's disposition process, which means that each of your bureaus was given the opportunity to express interest in this property. No city bureau wants this house, which is why Environmental Services seeks this council's authorization to dispose of this property through a public sale. Here today to tell us more about this ordinance, we have Eli Callison, one of our property managers at Environmental Services. Welcome, Eli.
Thank you, Commissioner Maps. Honestly, the talking points that you have pretty much cover everything that I was about to go through. This property is, as Commissioner said, up in the Columbia Slough area. It's immediately adjacent to Flyway Wetlands, which is a jointly owned property by BES and Portland Parks and Recreation. This site was acquired to add the wetland adjacent, or the wetland portions of the property to that, to the Flyway Wetlands resource area. The property that we're going to sell is 0.34 acres, considered to be a tear down. Estimated market value is a little over $200,000. In addition to going through the city disposition process as far as offering it to the remaining or all the other city bureaus, this property was also listed as part of the Safe Rest Village, or the excess property list that we gave to the Safe Rest Village team. So as far as we know, everybody that has interest for potential other uses has had an opportunity to take a look at it. Other than that, that really kind of covers everything, but I'm happy to take any questions anybody may have.
Colleagues, any questions on this particular item? Keelan, do we have any public testimony on this item?
We had one person sign up, Patrick Henry. I don't think they're on the call.
All right, very good. This is a first reading of a non-emergency ordinance. It moves to second reading. Thank you for the presentation. Item 385, which is a second reading.
Amend water code to comply with requirements per state statutes, correct a previous inadvertent omission, and clarify language.
Colleagues, second reading. We've heard the presentation. We've taken public testimony. Is there any further discussion on this item? Seeing none, please call the roll, Keelan.
Ryan?
Aye.
Hardesty?
Aye.
Maps?
Aye.
Rubio?
Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye. The ordinance is adopted. Item 386. This is a non-emergency ordinance.
Amend fee schedule for tree permits.
Commissioner Rubio.
Thank you, Mayor. Today I'm introducing an ordinance that would allow Portland Parks and Recreation Urban Forestry to update the tree permit fee schedule for fiscal year 22-23. It increases certain permit fees in order to recover costs for the services provided and maintain level of service to permit customers. Fees help provide essential tree services to residents, paying part of the cost of Portland Parks and Recreation Urban Forestry, performing its responsibilities as directed in Title 11 and the Urban Forest Management Plan. This ordinance would raise fees for development and inspection permits by 7.5% to mitigate personnel costs, increases for tree inspection services, and increase the proportion of the urban forestry's program budget that is cost recovered through service charges, fees, and licensing permits. The program is adding 2 FTE tree inspectors as part of fiscal year 22-23 budget development, expected to be partially funded by this fee increase. Parks projects that in real dollars, this fee increase will generate a high confidence estimate of $102,000 in new revenue, increasing 1.94 million to 2.04 million. The fees proposed are intended to meet the expectations and direction of Title 11. I'd now like to introduce Brian Lando from Urban Forestry to answer questions from council. Brian, are you there?
Does anybody have any questions? Any public testimony on this item?
No one signed up.
This is the first reading of a non-emergency ordinance. It moves to second reading. We have one more item, colleagues, and while I'm flipping back, Keelan reminded me that now that we've gone into in-person sessions, we have closed captioners as well as people working with open signal, as well as our great council clerks and all of us. Going forward, we will take a break every 2 hours. And so if I forget, Keelan, can you throw something at me or kick me in the side of the head? Commissioner Maps.
Have you finished that?
That was my complete thought.
As we transition back into this mix of hybrid, in-person and hybrid, I know one of the things I've heard from people in the audience today is if you come in to give testimony and you want to give a piece of paper to a member of council, someone was told, how do you do that?
Oh, yeah, thank you, Commissioner Maps. Any paper that needs to be distributed to council should be dropped off in room 130, the auditor's office on the first floor, and we will email it to everyone.
Okay, great. I think that's different from how it used to go. Thank you.
All right, item number 374, please, is the one that is pulled off the consent agenda.
Amend City Auditor's Independent Police Review Code to transfer the independent police review from the auditor to independent agency status reporting to City Council.
Very good. And I don't know who pulled this or who is here to present it. Dan Handelman, and who is here to present on it?
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Heidi Brown from the
Hi,
City
Heidi.
Attorney's Office. And we also have Dana Walton-McCauley and I think Ross Caldwell. Yes, they are both on as well if you have questions for them, but I can do the initial presentation.
Good. Heidi, why don't we do this? Why don't we have Dan testify since he's the one who pulled it, and that might help focus the questions.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Dan.
Good afternoon again, Mayor and Council members. This is Dan Handelman from Portland Cop Watch again. The IPR was created in 2001. At the time, City Council promised to revisit the structure in 1 year to evaluate whether it was working. It wasn't until 2008 that an evaluation was completed. The first major revisions to the code were made in 2010, 9 years after its creation. After the DOJ agreement went into place in 2012, more revisions were made to meet the guidelines of the agreement. There's always been considerable public input into these changes, but today there are code changes that nobody in the public saw until 5 days ago, and Council planned to push this through on a consent agenda without any testimony. Portland Cop Watch should not have had to pull this off the consent agenda to discuss this important oversight function for the police, especially because the continued operation of IPR is required by the DOJ agreement. There should be more time for community involvement. It's not clear why this is an emergency ordinance since the auditor said she would supervise the IPR until July 1. There should be a delay to consider modifying the code based on our testimony and the input of others, including the Citizen Review Committee, which is not meeting again until early June. And they didn't meet this month, so they couldn't have discussed this. Substantively, the language is creating a new power for a director to be able to place an item on the council agenda. City code limits that authority to council members or the auditor. We're 100% for this change, but you need to also revise City Code 3.02.040D. The director's authority should extend to the appointment of CRC members, IPR and CRC reports, the annual reviews of deadly force currently done by the OAR group, and more that they can place directly on the agenda. The director should also be required to present the IPR annual report to council. The charter now envisions the new review system to have a civilian board hire and fire that board's director, implying that they collectively will oversee the ongoing operations. While the code revisions provide that council can hire the director and fire them for a cause with at least 4 votes, it's not clear who will be conducting reviews of their job's performance on an ongoing basis. The recent changes to the Police Association contract allow the city to decide who will be conducting administrative investigations into misconduct. We believe that invoking this clause should allow council to modify current code so IPR can directly compel officer testimony, one of the hurdles the body has faced since its inception. This and other changes should be made as long as the code is being updated. Under code, the CRC can advise IPR on operations. They have not been actively doing so for years. Council should create guidelines for CRC moving forward. Moreover, the director should be required to inform CRC when a policy review is being done to give them the opportunity to work with staff on creating these reports. IPR has done 2 crowd control reviews while CRC has had a crowd control work group, but they did not seek the community members' input on either time. The code change also gives council the opportunity to make other improvements to IPR as it heads into what is likely its final 2 years or so of existence. This should include changing the CRC standards of review from the deferential reasonable person standard to a preponderance of the evidence standard, leaving the final decision in the hands of council, the chief, or the police commissioner. And this is a really unique opportunity to fix up the IPR as it's heading into its final stretch to improve police oversight. So we hope that you will consider putting a pause on this item today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Heidi, did you have any response to Dan's comments?
Yes, Mayor and Council. This code change is focused on making the changes necessary to move IPR out from the auditor's office. It does need to be completed by June 30th to comport with the auditor's withdrawal of her consent. It's for that reason that we put it on as a emergency ordinance so that it wouldn't get delayed in the process and have the 30-day timeline, and we would be scrambling at the last minute to get this all finished. So the interest was to get this through quickly, and the changes that we made are simply to comport with this withdrawal of consent and to address the requirements of the DOJ and stay in compliance with the Department of Justice. The idea of the removal of the director of IPR being limited to for cause and a supermajority vote of council was to address the Department of Justice's concern that IPR remained independent since they're now moving outside of the auditor's office. We had proposed this plan to the Department of Justice, and they approved that. And that plan went forward. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second. So that is why we move forward with this. The other changes that are being requested by Mr. Handelman, I know there are ones that have been proposed in the past. They would likely require bargaining. And because we've already worked through how to set up the oversight board, I didn't feel that we could get these changes through in the time that we need to get them through to address the concerns of moving IPR out of the auditor's office. If council wants to take up other changes, I would ask that you adopt these code changes today and then direct us to consider other code changes, but understanding that they may very well trigger bargaining obligations. And we're currently working on the body camera bargaining obligations now, and those are taking up a lot of our time.
Thank you, Heidi. Are any further questions on this item? Keelan, is there any other public testimony?
We have 2 people signed up.
2 minutes each, name for the record, please.
First up, we have Michelle Stevenson.
Good afternoon.
Is it me first? Hello.
Yeah, Michelle, you're up.
Hello, my name is Michelle Stevenson. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a community member and speak for myself. First, I want to comment on, I didn't read everything Dan Handelman did, but I agree pretty much with everything he says. And second, I think it's so important for the independent police review to be completely independent. It's really important that there's an investigatory body that doesn't have major ties and is not beholden to police. People who have been hurt by police deserve fair, just, and respectful treatment. The Federal Department of Justice has pointed out that the Internal Affairs is doing things it shouldn't, including hunting for ways to get police officers off and letting PPA representatives attend interviews when they shouldn't be allowed, among other problematic practices. The IPR doesn't have a lot of power, but if we take the IPR away, there will be only the police policing the police while the PAC does its work, which hasn't worked in the past. Thirdly, the auditor's office was providing extra help and manpower to IPR through the ombudsman office in some cases that were complicated and traumatic. It would be helpful if the city could provide the same somehow, or hire someone to be a sort of victim advocate or one point of contact for those who have been traumatized and might have PTSD, or for some other reason might need a one point of contact. It would be nice if the city council can go even further than the auditor's office was doing and offer a more thorough protection and barrier between the plaintiff and the police when that is needed. I think it's important to protect plaintiffs from the police. I hope there will be systemic changes to that so that in this interim, no other community member will be hurt unnecessarily. It's not okay to hurt people. The police should be public servants and help people, not hurt people.
Thank you. Keelan, is
And
there a second individual? Thank you. I'm sorry. I cut you off early. I apologize. Go ahead. I'll give you an extra 15. Sorry.
It's okay. It's not very long. I speak as a generational Portlander that I also hope that the community members will receive as much or more respect and care as the Thompson Elk has received. Thank you.
Thank you, and I apologize for cutting you off. Keelan, there was a second individual?
Yes,
Yeah,
Debbie
thanks.
Iona.
Good afternoon. I'm Debbie Iona, representing the League of Women Voters of Portland. The League is encouraged that City Council is prepared to take the steps necessary to ensure that our civilian oversight system is able to continue operations until the new oversight board is ready to accept complaints. We have a few comments to share. At the recent fairness hearing on the settlement agreement, the League noted that the city's transition plan did not include a process for nominating Citizen Review Committee members. We support the IPR's proposal described in the code changes that the director will submit nominees to City Council after completion of the current selection process described in City Code. We recommend that the IPR director hiring process be improved by incorporating CRC and community involvement, including only representatives from City Council offices in the process is not enough given the importance of our police oversight system to the public. It is disappointing to see that the revised code does not include the CRC's longstanding desire for a change to its standard of review from the current reasonable person standard to preponderance of the evidence in appeals of misconduct cases. You know, as Mr. Hanlon pointed out, they've been asking for this since 2008, and it's disappointing it has to continue to be postponed. In light of community interest in police oversight and the settlement agreement, the League would have preferred to receive more notice that this proposal was coming before City Council. Both the PCCEP and IPR have email notification lists that could have been utilized to distribute the information. Furthermore, CRC should have been consulted. Finally, we'd like to thank IPR Director Caldwell and City Council for moving forward with these changes and encourage you to consider the League's suggestion before granting your final approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, any further questions? Very good. Keelan, please call the roll.
Mayor, could I clarify one thing before you
Go ahead.
call the roll? Thank you so much. I just wanted to be clear that we'll have a process for council to appoint a new IPR director if the need arises, but we're not anticipating that you would change, like Mr. Caldwell will continue as the IPR director. And I just wanted to make sure that was clear. There was a question raised at some point earlier this week.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate that. Any further discussion? Please call the roll, Keelan.
Ryan.
Aye.
Hardesty.
Aye.
Maps.
Aye.
Rubio.
I just want to quickly thank Stephanie Howard, Mark Bond, Derek Bradley, Shannon Carney, and my policy director, Rico Lujan Valerio, for the work that they've done on this item and the other amendments that were recently approved. Also thank Heidi Brown, Vashmi Reddy, Sarah Ames, and Robert Taylor for facilitating this group and this process. I vote aye.
Wheeler.
I vote aye. The ordinance is adopted, and we will be back here in about 50 minutes. We are adjourned.